So, shall we stand and have the pledge of allegiance to the flag, if you're able? The pledge of allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Andrew Benson. Here. Ruth Groff. Here. Bronwyn Losi.
Here.
Joseph Wetmore. Not here.
Not yet.
Edward Levine.
Here. Okay. So we're up to, let's see. Up to public hearing. Agenda number 4, motion to open the public hearing for proposed local law number 1 of 2022. Can you hear me okay? Everybody, Brown, hear me okay? Okay. Is there a second?
Oh, second.
That you're a quick learner. Okay. Any further discussion? Mrs. Munson?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Okay, 6:31.
Does, I don't see anybody here to speak
No.
about
So
CJ maybe.
CJ, do you have anybody that is waiting to speak?
Nope,
Pertains-
no participants.
We're all clear? Okay.
Got it.
You like my orange mask? I'm kind of like breaking out here in the.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to be color coordinated. I must admit that this, you ladies are superb at this. I can't. I got the mask thing. I have a hard time with a tie. But now I got the whole thing coordinated here. And it's just phenomenal. Just, I bet you will someday soon, right? Can't you order online? Go with your, right, stripes a little bit. How much more I gotta talk before we close this?
And you're done.
We're done?
Yeah.
I see Brown is riveted by this conversation. There you go, right on cue. Okay, in that case, let's close the public hearing. Motion to close it? Second. Okay. Mrs. Munson?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, agenda item number 5, resolution adopting local law number 1 of 2022, respecting residency requirements for certain appointed officials and employees. Would someone like to move that? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Andrew Benson. Yes. Ruth Groff.
Yes.
Bronwyn Losi.
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore. Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay. Now we're on to item 6. Privilege of the floor. What's the over under tonight? Anybody here? Anybody there? Commander CJ?
I've got Dondi in the waiting room here. I'm not sure what he would be here to
He's there
speak up.
actually for the engineer's road report, item 18.
Oh, okay, great. He's the only one in the waiting room.
Okay. So, no privilege of the floor, move on to 6A, optional board member responses. Okay. Item 7. Don't throw your wrist out. Lansing Community Library Report is in your packet. Andrew, do you have anything else to comment on that? You're still the liaison, there, right? I mean, okay. That's in your packet. I did reach out to them we have these masks, these KN95s. They're actually white. We have a whole bunch of these. If anybody needs them, I gave a whole bunch to the libraries along with some test kits. They also had some coming the next couple of days, so that's a source for people. Also, I also gave, I think, 180 to the food pantry. And if anybody knows, for instance, farmers, I reached out to a couple of them. If you know of anybody that can't get in to get these things, we have some here. They also have them at the library. They also have them at probably the food pantry, amongst other places. Okay. So moving on to Lansing Youth Service Report. That's also in your packet. Agenda number 9, Mike Sugger's report.
He stopped in today and said that he would not be attending, and he would send a report at a later time.
Okay, fair enough. Agenda 10, Park and Rec report. That would be Pat Terrell. Pat?
It is in your packet, but something Ed and I discussed today with the bulkhead project. There was almost $4,000 left in last year's budget. We didn't get to the bulkhead last year, and I'm going to have to do some electrical work along the wall. So I may need a little bit of money that's not in the budget for this year for some electrical work, some wiring and some conduit, maybe some carpentry, lumber. Just, so I was talking to Ed today and he suggested ARPA money for that. I don't know how everyone else feels about that, but it's not going to be a tremendous amount of money.
So where this comes from, unfortunately, I don't think we could have encumbered this like you do, for instance, with dredging, right? Each year you'll see 20,000, right? You might keep 20,000, then there's like 2,000, whatever, for dredging. And sometimes when we had to dredge Salmon Creek, we had to be dependent on Mother Nature. Let it go down as low as it can before we can dredge it. Because there's rules and regs of how where you can dredge, how much you can dredge, and so forth. So my point is with the dredging is that it's the same type of thing here, right? Mother Nature wasn't very cooperative last year, so they couldn't get the bulkhead. The only reason I'm using this as a segue into the ARPA money is that in the future, as we have discussed previously, Ruth, is that anything we do for capital improvements, use the ARPA money for, if that builds up a surplus in those funds, that frees that up, we collapse back in the fund balance to use that money for whatever we need to. Okay. And as the lens keeps widening for ARPA, what it can and cannot do, those are things to maybe consider. And this might be a test run to see how this works. We're talking $4,000 to $5,000. To do this, maybe we can stuff over. We'll discuss with our highway department later when he has a report as far as other things go. But these are just suggestions of how we can kind of ease into this technique and see where we can go with that. So as we say, it's a teachable moment for all of us, where we can go. But I think this would fall under capital improvements.
Right.
Is one of the categories. But it's just a matter of when the bill comes, it has to be paid, right? We can't advance the money. Do we take it out of ARPA funds or not? So we may have that discussion down the road, but I simply want to make everybody comfortable that we've at least planted those seeds for discussion for later. And no action is required now for that.
And just background, so we bought the bulkhead material, the corrugated panels, and all of our pressure treated lumber last year on budget because we thought we were going to get to it last year, but we didn't. And I didn't want to buy the electric materials because I didn't know what we were going to get into and what we would need exactly for electric. So I didn't buy any of those materials out of the budgeted amount from last year.
Okay. So anything else?
That's it.
By the way, thank you very much for lending a hand during the blizzard.
Yeah.
I'm
Happy to help.
And that's something that we perhaps discuss in another month or so when we talk about comp time that is approved and everything. Where's it go? How much do we accrue? That type of thing. Some of the people that read it at comp time, which is on the shoulder of the department heads to make sure that they use up their comp time as opposed to paying out salary. But the people from past department helped out a lot during that. 12 inches, 10 inches, whatever it was a bunch, right? And that's why we always have cross training. We'll just jump right in. So I'm sure Mike, you appreciate this.
Ed, can you pull the mic closer? I'm really having trouble hearing you.
Oh, Joe, hi. There, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's
hear me
much better. Thank you. Sorry I'm late. My computer crashed on me just as I logged on.
Okay. So moving forward, we're now up to highway report. Unless you want to add something else.
No, one hand washes the other, so happy
Okay.
to help out Mikey whenever we can.
Okay. One thing though, I will mention here, and I don't know if this is, no, we can talk about this later. Fine. Okay, I'm good. You're good. I'm good. Okay, Michael.
Good evening. My report's in the packet. Hasn't been the best winter so far for water main breaks, obviously with the colder temperatures, the frost getting in the ground. And so we have another one today that we're gonna have to deal with probably next week. I'm also concerned about the roads. Everybody's been traveling the roads around Tompkins County, you notice they're a little bit rougher. Frost in the ground making everything even move. So we'll see how it plays out. I was talking with Ed earlier this week about stone and oil. Ed, I did find my numbers here.
Good.
We're looking at for everything I agreed to that the board signed for stone and oil, we're looking at about 2,100 ton of 1A stone. Roughly, the price is now about $17.50 a ton, so about $38,500 in stone. And if we can truck it in, it'll save maybe $12 a ton. But if I can get the truck in a little bit earlier, I might be able to save actually on the overall cost because we're still on last year's procurement with Tompkins County, so the prices might be a little bit cheaper. But we'll see. Other than that, that's where I'm at.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Mike?
I do, so if you have a break in the water, I guess I don't understand it, but, does that mean there are certain people who don't get water? Or-
Yep.
Yeah.
So we work with Bolton Point to isolate where the break is to try to minimize the amount of customers out of water that will be out of service.
And are they advised or they just open the tap and there's no water?
They're not advised. There's just no way. I mean, like at I think it was 15 Whispering Pines 2 weeks ago, where it's -4. It took 7 hours to fix. The people at that resident knew, but the people at that residence did know. I knocked on the door because that was right in their driveway. So they were like, you need to move your car out. People within the neighborhood are pretty good. They see a lot of lights and a lot of action. We'll come up and ask, and how long. Hopefully it's about 3 hours. It's 2 hours before we can dig. Even with an emergency ticket, utilities have to be called in. Hopefully an hour for repair. Being so cold that night when the pumps were shut down, we were freezing up. But 7 hours later, people had water. So we do our best. Usually it's about 3-4 hours at the most.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions for Mike? So one of the goals we have, real quick, this is more just an FYI, is that we try to do redundancies. For instance, Drake Road now is redundant, so in case there's a breakup by, say, Rose Harbor, shut down, the water still can go down by the school and everything else because there's another source that can go from. We did that with number 5, which went from Armstrong Road down Trip Hammer, down to the corner. And right at Crossroads is where there's a very high pressure system. The redundancy came though when we went on the back way over to the highway building on that, in the highway department, and looped that around. So in case there's a break at Crossroads here, God forbid, and they always don't seem to happen at 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, usually it's at odd hours, you can still get the water going down there, so you only cut off a small supply. Okay, so we try to do these redundancies for that reason. So anyways, one of the things is though, with your stone and oil, and that's 38,500,
Right.
is to have these, once again, conversations on what we want to do with the ARPA money. Now, when we had 2 years ago, when we thought we would have 15% decrease in sales tax revenue and end up being 4.8%, it was still the highest county of all New York State, decrease in what our estimate was. The highway department says, we're gonna cut back on the DB road maintenance, which is one of the major sales taxes, major source of that, $200,000. So they have $200,000 less work on the roads. And so this year, Mikey is basically focused on anything that's not moving, it's going to be stone and oil or paved, basically, on the roads. We try to do the best we can. The reason I'm having this conversation is to say we have to start thinking, can we start putting some of the ARPA money towards that because of the fact that they're down 200,000 in the budget. We still can't give them $200,000 out of the ARPA money. We have to wait for things that happen, and road maintenance is one of them. So I want to have the board think about this as we start to once again chip away at this. We have $409,000 in that fund. I think it's the HFA or H fund, whatever it is up there, right? And there's another tranche of money, $407,000 coming again this year. So as we continue to move that money, we have until 2024 to spend it. But as we have solid projects, my understanding is you have to have an invoice first before you use the money. And so we're planting those seeds now for that discussion as he's trying to be as aggressive as he can to stockpile now. So when it is time to stone and oil, he's going to basically literally hit the road running on this and do as much as he can, as hard as he can. Right?
Yeah, you're right. The sooner the better. You want the stone set in. We'd like to prep the roads as whatever you signed. We're looking at Salmon Creek, Old Road, and Davis Road, the 3 longest roads we have in town, and resurfacing them with stone and oil. But there's prepping, like putting shoulders and making sure the pipes are good. But all the prep is going to happen after we probably do brush pickup and hit the ground running on that and get in as soon as we can with weather dependent with super to get in and stone oil.
So that stone that you're ordering, right? It's 38,500. That I'm hearing correctly. When is that going to come?
Well, if Mother Nature works with us a little bit and the salt hauling slows down, I can probably get some of the trucks to haul in, Nick's brothers or whoever Canova will use. Maybe half by them and half by us.
My question is, will there be an invoice in this pile next month?
There could be if the salt hauling slows down. I talked to the salesman at Canova, Town, and they're at the mercy of what's more important now, that the trucks are gonna haul salt. And they're gonna haul salt where needed.
Totally understand. Totally understand. No sense of urgency. Just want to see what the procedure is. So, Guy, try to bring you into this conversation for us to move forward. And I don't want to put you on the spot here because I'm not expecting exact answers tonight. But as the money is in the fund, as the bills come due, as we pay the bill, would we simply just pay it out of that fund if it is an ARPA fund payment, shall we say? I'm looking more for procedure.
Well, again, you probably would want to set up a ledger to track what you're spending the ARPA funds on, since you may have reporting obligations, though currently there's a number of exemptions for projects under $1 million for certain sized municipalities. I think we fall into that category. But I would still have a ledger and a separate accounting of what you're spending. But yes, if you have the funds and you want to disperse them for anything, presumably you would choose something that's ARPA eligible, then you would just spend the funds. But the reporting requirements are changing, so I'd at least make sure I had a really good record of what they were spent on. And if reporting is required, it's not just paid X for Y. You have to explain how it falls within the categories of ARPA. And there are hundreds of Q&A questions that have come in and what about this? What about this? And the answers that they provide are pretty much a good template to show you the level of detail you sometimes have to go into. So it's not just a numerical ledger, but it's a factual ledger, a brief explanation, sort of like, you know, a little more complicated than, but sort of like what you're supposed to put on the back of a M&E receipt for a tax deductible meals and entertainment event. What's the business purpose? Who did you meet with, when, for how long, and what did you discuss? That type of documentation. That's what I'd
I see
recommend,
that-
but yeah, you can spend it. There's no question.
I see this almost as a grant, basically, and you have to justify what it was used for and be able to defend it in case it's challenged, as you do with most grants nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analogy.
Okay. So Mary Ellen, perhaps we'll have a discussion about this sooner than later to set up something along with Charmaine, so we can get moving on this to at least entertain ideas on where we want to put this money as we move forward on this, okay?
Yep, absolutely. I just made notes on exactly that thing. So all good.
Can I ask Guy a question?
Okay, Mikey first and then Joe, okay? I see your hand, Joe.
So Guy, would this be similar to like what I track for the chips and the extreme winter recovery? Basically, I have to document my mileage, what went down, everything I used, and kind of have my invoices, everything in a row from New York State to reimburse us. Some tracking like that would be required.
Yeah, I didn't catch all of that, but I think what you said was, would the reporting be akin to how you report your chips, where you record where it was done, the mileage, the cost of the materials used, and the cost of the labor utilized? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Expanding roads, expanding parks, you know, and, you know, essential utilities to provide for more security in the event of an emergency, i.e. water, sewer, internet, broadband. Those things are all like really right down the middle of the ARPA lane. It's when you start getting a little farther on, if you get a little more esoteric, you have to start checking a little more. As I said, since the rules have changed, and I know they did issue a final interim rule, and the final regulations, I believe, are published by now. I would simply recommend before disbursement that somebody take a quick look and go, yep, still clearly covered. Some things are going to be able to be verified in a matter of seconds. Some might take a little digging. And if it's not clear, then someone can call me, or I can, you know, point to where the resources are for you. Either or.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Joe?
Okay, I've got two really different questions. One is from Mikey. I know your crew is working full time. How much can we add on to this year's budget and have you actually being able to accomplish that plus everything else? Or you know, if we say, you know, here's $200,000, are we essentially hiring an outside crew to do the work?
So the 200,000 for the stone oil, we work together with Suco like we would normally do. It's quite a fast process once we get the stone in. It goes down fast, and we wouldn't necessarily need another crew. Just working with Suco.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm asking what are the limits of how much we can add on to you per year? Because, you know, we can give you unlimited stone and oil, but you can only put so much of it down per day. You know, where are the limits, and how much more can we add on without just essentially hiring some other crew to come and do some of the roads? Because, you know, you're doing what, your 5 or 10 miles this year, plus you're doing all the pipes, plus you're doing everything else. You know, what's the limit that we can add on before we start really stretching and just hiring other crews to do the work?
I think where I have the 16.8 miles is where I'm comfortable this year. Getting that work done. Look, I'm not going to have a water line on my back to do, right? So that's going to free up a full crew every single day to do what I need to do with prepping the roads for paving. I'm sure Dalrymple's going to give me a solid price on paving. I plan on doing some of our own paving, and plan on working with Suco. But I think without the water line installation, it's really going to save. where I can get back to the maintenance of the roads and maintenance of the water and sewer.
So, okay, good. I just don't want to put more on you than you're going to be able to do, because that's a consideration too. And, this is a nice influx of money. And I'd certainly like to see us catch back up with the roads with it, but I want to make sure that we're not asking more than you can do with it. My next question is, who decides that we're spending ARPA money as opposed to town money? Is that a decision the supervisor or the bookkeeper makes? Is that something the town board has to authorize? Where's that line? I don't understand how that works.
I would personally, even if I am given that authority, I would want the town board to decide it. I would want them to discuss it, and I would want them to come to a consensus where you want the money.
Well, I'll note that I think we've got a fairly good consensus that a good chunk of this is going to go to highway. I'll note that we've already spent 9,000 and something of ARPA money for some of the website work, and I'm not clear exactly which project got paid out of that, but in the last set of vouchers, some of that came out of the ARPA money. So we've already started spending it under some procedure, and I'm not sure exactly how that was authorized. And I'm not worried about it. I'm just trying to understand what the process is going to be, what the process has been, how that's going to work.
Well, my understanding is that with any bill that's paid, it is authorized by the town board.
Right, but that was authorized apparently before the town board decided. I think what's happened up until now is we've been kind of casually saying, yes, we want to spend ARPA money on some of these internet projects. Yes, we want to spend money on some of the road work. And at some point, I think we need to more formally say that. And I'm trying to figure out how that happens, because, we're getting to the point where we have to actually make some of those statements. Right? And how can we move that forward?
I think that's the purpose of this discussion, Joe. And it is something that, once again, whether the board has the authority to do this or not, I would like to have the board decide on where this goes, because once again, we can't spend taxpayers' money unless, as we do with budget models or anything else, we need to have it approved by the town board. And that discussion will continue. And it will, I hope it will be, as we continue to go through this process, and the town board will decide where this money gets approved to be used.
Well, I understand that we've been having this discussion for about 4 months now, and I want to move it to some decisions, like X amount should go towards the internet work that we're doing, the stuff that CJ and Pat have been working on, that which is applicable to ARPA. I think we need to figure out an amount, and the town board say yes. How much are we going to give to the highway department, at least initially? Let's put together a number and have the town board say, yes. I don't want to come back in March and have another discussion, but we're never actually coming to a decision.
So if I understand correctly, you want a budget, basically.
I think, I'd like to start budgeting it. And I'd be fine at the capital committee, the capital committee put together something that would work. But I want to move us from discussing, having general consensus, to making some decisions.
Well, I think we're doing that. If you want
I want some numbers. I want some numbers to say we're going to put, 20,000 towards internet and 200,000 towards the highway. And I'm just throwing numbers out there. I'm not beholden to any of those, but I want to start putting numbers down, have the town board say, yes, we're going to spend our ARPA money doing X, Y, and Z, and start doing that. And how do we move that forward?
Well, okay, you want to start it right now. We can put this to a vote right now if you want to, for 200,000 towards the highway department.
I think it would be more useful to look, rather than piecemeal, sort of even though we've all agreed on it, we're all saying yeah, we think that this should go to the highway department. I would find it really useful if the capital committee would look at the ARPA, create a proposed budget for us to say, this is what's coming in. If we put 200,000 to the highway department, this is what's left. we propose, it looks like you can put this much into this, and bring it back to us as a proposal, then we have something to launch off of. I think that would be a really helpful way to do it.
Okay, Brown,
I like that.
I understand that, Brown, but we've had this discussion with the highway department, the 200,000. This is something, I don't think you can control every penny up front with a budget, but I think what you can, and some of this might be a piecemeal. I mean, this is what other places are doing with their capital projects, right? You can pick certain capital projects, but I've had this discussion numerous times, at least it's been mentioned, about the $200,000 going back into road maintenance. That right there is
Right,
a
but I
solid
think,
okay, if I may finish, please. We don't need to have the capital committee go through that for that part. That's been discussed. If you want to go through that and put that down there to go through that procedure, I think we have time if that makes people more comfortable. But at some point, it's going to be a recommendation by that committee, right? It's an advisory board, and and we'll see where it goes. And that's fine with me. But we've got some bills that are coming due. As far as this goes, it would be a nice exercise to start that. But once again, if you want to pull back and wait, we can have that discussion. I think we have a capital committee meeting before our next board meeting.
Correct.
Yes, we can discuss it then and come up with a solid recommendation for the town board if you want to do it then. Because there are some bills that are coming due. And I don't think it's going to be piecemeal. I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to be visionary. Because we do see some of these expenses that we see coming up. But if you want to go through that procedure for the advisory board to give a suggestion to the town board, okay, we can do that.
I think what Ron might have been saying is maybe we need something with some rationale behind it. Why are we going to give 200,000? I'm just throwing out numbers here, but just some rationale behind why we're going to be giving up certain amounts to certain areas, I guess.
Okay.
I also, I will also, I like what Broadman's saying, but I also want to say that, yeah, we keep throwing out a number of about 200,000 to highway, but what they might actually need is 195,000. What they might need is 225,000. And we need to start putting some of those numbers down. And I recognize budgets change over time, Ed. We're not going to set this in stone and say this is immutable, but if we don't start throwing numbers together, then we're not going to start being able to really plan this out. And so let's figure out how much goes to the highway, how much goes to the computer stuff, and then start throwing proposals for what else is applicable. And I think that's where the capital committee can start saying, here's projects that we'd like to see, here's amounts that would go, so that we can start really planning this out.
Okay. Anything else?
So the capital committee will come back to us in March with some proposals.
That would be, I have no problem with that. That would be fine.
Okay, as long as we're all agreed on that, I'm fine. Thank you.
Does the rest of the board agree with that also? If you want to go through that procedure, be a very nice exercise, that's fine. We can discuss it then. Mike, you can come up with your estimates. Pat, you can come up with your estimates. Deb, you can come up with your estimates. CJ, your estimates, or whoever, if you think of there's things out there. We'll see if applicable, we'll see where it goes. Moving on. CJ, Director of Planning.
Yeah, hi, everyone. There's the report in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. One thing I do really want to bring to everyone's attention, you may have noticed I included some reporting from our stormwater management officer, John Zepko. He has let me know that there is going to be a pretty significant change to the way that we do MS4 reporting and management in the town. So not to get too far into acronyms, but MS4 is a municipal separate storm sewer system. And the point of it is to deal with all the conveyances of water collection and discharge. We are an MS4 community, designated as such. Every community in Tompkins County has been designated as an MS4, with the exception, I think, of the town of Danby. So what's happened is, and perhaps a council can speak to this as well, but there was a settlement between the EPA and several environmental agencies requiring the EPA and DEC to revise their process. And DEC has recently released a draft of the new general permit for public comment, and the changes are extensive. The MS4 communities are now required to have extensive and detailed mapping and modeling of our entire area. The great thing is we do have a little bit of a head start, thanks to somebody actually on this call, Donnie Harner from TG Miller, as well as Angel Heinekel in the group at Tompkins County Soil and Water Conservation District. We're very lucky to have them, but we have to also develop an inventory of all of the public and private stormwater infrastructure in the town. We have to do specific outreach in the community. We have to have formalized operating procedures for each type of minimum control measures, which include everything from public participation to illicit discharge, and of course, construction and post-construction controls. There's formal training requirements for staff, so that will involve the highway department and us as well, including in testing requirements and increased reporting. In essence, what I'm saying is that the DEC is proposing essentially that every town prepare essentially a SWIP for itself, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, essentially on a macro level. Obviously, we're anticipating this will be a significant undertaking. I'll keep you posted. It's currently in draft right now, but I did want to let you know that we're anticipating those changes coming down the pipe. And any questions?
for CJ?
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
Yeah, we just got the new FEMA maps out that are suggesting a different flood pattern than the ones we've been doing before. I'm curious as to what the process is for amending those maps. You know, how do we go forward and say, hey, we want to adjust them thusly? And I've already forwarded to CJ one adjustment up Salmon Creek in which we've created a small floodplain that's not on their map as part of the remediation of the bend up there. And how is that going to affect our plan? Are we going to have to use the new FEMA maps? Are we using the old FEMA maps for putting together our stormwater management? How are those two going to coincide?
That's a good question. The interesting part is we basically treat, although in practice, obviously, we're a bit more holistic about this, but stormwater management and floodplain management are distinctly different entities in the town. And just for fun, yes, the FEMA maps, we have referenced both the existing firms, so the flood insurance rate maps, as well as the anticipated new maps that are coming out from FEMA. Now, if there's any changes you'd like to make, certainly forward those comments to me, and I'm happy to get them over to the project managers at FEMA. And Donnie may actually have some comments to add on this as well. I know Dave Herrick has also been looking pretty carefully at the new maps and has been sending comments on behalf of several municipalities. But in short, you should have received a link to the viewer. Let me know if it doesn't work, and please send me along any comments. And as floodplain administrator, I'll do my best to make sure they get to FEMA.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Okay, let us move on to the let's see, engineers report. Nothing to report. We'll have plenty of time for TG Miller to play tonight. The consent agenda. Mrs. Munson, will you walk me through this, please?
Okay, usually have people read a couple of the motions or resolutions, get all the way to the end on page 15. Someone will make a first, a second, and then I'll do the roll call vote.
Okay. So Andra, you want to do the first four, please?
Motion authorizing Conservation Advisory Council to prepare and send thank you letter to Park Foundation. Motion authorizing and directing the code revision committee to prepare preliminary draft rural agricultural or zoning district text and map amendments. Motion to approve and authorize updated consulting and agency agreements with Llama Real Estate. Motion approving Evan Ogata as liaison and David Wolf as alternate town of Lansing liaison to the Tompkins County Environmental Management Council.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, would you like to do the next four, please?
Okay, motion number 2210, motion authorizing town of Lansing Parks and Recreation Supervisor to sign Williamson Wallbook Company Cloud hosted software proposal. Resolution 2262, resolution amending resolution 21-145, authorizing highway superintendent to purchase additional equipment and original dump truck purchase. I'm sorry, can I just read?
Four, please.
Resolution 2263. Am I supposed to be reading the detail or just the?
No.
You can just read right off the agenda.
Well, there's more, yeah, okay. There's a little more detail. The agenda is usually cut a little briefer than what the actual, I think she's reading in the right place.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
perfect.
All right, so resolution 2263, resolution approving highway department purchase and equipment in accordance with capital replacement plans.
CJ said,
And
please let Deb
resolution
know.
2264,
needs to go
resolution
off consent
authorizing
agenda.
the execution of contracts with the contract with GTM Pinnacle for new employee handbook and related services.
Brown, you do the next four, please?
Sure. Resolution 2265, appointing members to the Board of Ethics. Resolution 2266, approving the standard workday and reporting for elected and appointed officials.
I just need to intercept something here.
Yeah.
Just got a text from CJ that Kay needs to come off of the consent agenda. I don't know if it needs completely off or it needs to be moved. I'm not sure what she's going for.
Okay.
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 So
I will,
It's moving to another
Scratch.
place or just, are we talking about it later, CJ, or it's done for tonight?
Yeah, just please move it to the end or by 15, please, if the board is comfortable with that, of course.
Okay. So.
is that going to renumber things, Deb?
Of
Should I stop
course.
saying the numbers? Okay, I'll stop saying the numbers then. The next one, resolution upgrading information aid in planning and code enforcement department.
Okay.
And resolution hiring fourth part-time constable for the Lansing Town Court. I think that's 4.
It is. Joe, you want to do the last two, please?
Resolution scheduling public hearing on proposed local law number 2 of 2022 for proposed local early retirement incentive for qualifying officials and employees. And approve audit and budget modifications. Is there another one that I'm missing?
No. I
No,
think
you
that's
did
it.
excellent. Thank you. Okay, now we go to page 15, consent agenda motion. So.
I'll move it.
Okay. There's
I'll
a
second.
Okay, Ms. Munson?
And just to let you know, I'll change these numbers appropriately when I do the final minutes.
Okay.
Andrew Benson,
Yes,
Ruth Brown, sorry. Brian Winlosi,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay. Item 15, resolution authorizing acceptance of funding from New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation for the purpose of funding the Myers Park project. Also move.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? The reason I pulled this off the consent agenda was now to make perfectly clear that we may have to bond some of this money. And this has been on the advice of the Capital Improvement Committee, which we met already, they have advised to move this forward. You have the emails, and there's also hard copies of the latest municipal solutions. what the debt service may be with 3 million, 3.5 million, and 4 million on there. So keep that in mind. I don't want to have anybody have a surprise later on if we have to bond something. Now, most of that may be in kind. It just depends how Mother Nature wants to cooperate with us starting next year, and also with the people we have, what we can do there, right? But they also have their own workload. I've talked in depth with the department heads of the rec department with Pat and also the highway department with Mike. They are committed to give as much as they can to this, but they also are committed to protect the town and provide those services first. So this is being, as I call it, truthful, upfront. Here it is in front of you that we may have to bond some of this. And it isn't like OMG later on that we have to do this. And you saw what the debt service was. Now, looking at this, we see what the debt service is, and if we have to bond it, we will, and go from there. Guy, do you have any comments on this before we move this forward? Unless there's our discussion.
No, only that I agree. It's a great idea to have it as the subject of a separate vote so the resolution can be certified in case it does need to ultimately be part of a bond package.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Can't hear you, Joe.
I assume that if it's bonded, it's going to have to come back before the board for a couple of votes to do that. But I'm fine with that. I think this is a really exciting project. I'm really happy that we're going to be able to make Myers Park into even a better park than it is now. And I'm happy to move forward with this.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, Joe, a bond resolution would come back for formal approval. And it probably would also be subject to permissive referendum, though, at least historically speaking, in this particular town, supporting recreation hasn't been all that controversial, but we'll see.
It is one of those things that please keep in mind for the public. This will not be done by the end of the summer. This is maybe a 2 to 3 year project. So we ask for patience. And when this first started many years ago, it was not an overnight. It'll be a 3-year overnight sensation, right, CJ? So there we are, as we say. Okay, Mrs. Munson, no further discussion.
Andrew Benson,
Yes,
Ruth Groff,
Yes,
Brian Lamosi,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Item 16 in your packet. Resolution adopting amended town COVID-19 leave time and general policies.
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Second, any further discussion? Okay, Mrs. Munson?
Andrew Benson,
Yes,
Ruth Groff,
yes,
Brian Lamosi,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Board member reports. You can give the.
wait.
Didn't CJ has that other resolution? she
Oh,
wants to
yes,
talk
I'm sorry,
about.
CJ, my mistake. Yes, let's go back to K. Resolution declaring intent to establish lead agency for adoption of a local law to amend the code of the town of Lansing, chapter 270 zoning. Okay, is there a motion?
I need to get back to that page. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Coffee's kicking in, I'm sorry.
I'd be happy to move it, but I'd like to hear what CJ had to say because I think she had a reason for moving this off the consent agenda. So why don't we ask CJ to give her thoughts behind it?
We're going to do that as soon as we get a motion in a second so we can discuss it.
Okay, I'll move it.
We're waiting for Mrs. Munson to catch up.
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why there was a delay here.
Didn't somebody else here already move it? Or no? No.
I
Okay.
don't think so.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. So the further discussion, CJ, you want to interject now?
Yes, thank you. So on the second, when you met for the special meeting, I believe there was an informal directive to examine changes in zoning that were not originally included in the code update schedule of adoption, which this was intended to be written for. So the intention for this particular resolution was to cover the rural agricultural zoning district changes, site plan review, which is also within zoning in chapter 270, as well as some general provisions, including definitions. My understanding is that the town board would like us to also pursue additional changes to zoning. So in essence, I was looking to confer with council and with the town board about amending any of the language in the resolution to make it clear that that covered those sections of zoning. And so I'm happy to pass that language on to the town clerk if that would be convenient. The aforementioned sections of town code. So that would be RA, site plan review, and general provisions.
And my understanding is that, so we aren't sort of muddying the waters, and this wouldn't pertain to anything we talked about at the February 2nd meeting. That would be a separate discussion. Is that right? To just make that clear, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. So we just wanted to kind of pull that, that's a kind of a long planned initiative. I did talk with Guy about it to say, hey, should we include this in one action? I think we could include them in one declaration of lead agency, but I think for the sake of cleanliness, would like to have this resolution just be clear, defined as, the already planned scope and based on the motion that you all just approved a couple minutes ago.
So you basically want to make it clean. What it sounds like. You basically want to make it clean, that it's straightforward, this is what it's about, and if there's other things that need to be addressed, there'll be a separate resolution at a future date, correct? Right.
Yeah, and to that end, we'd just essentially like to change the third whereas to add in after chapter 270 zoning to just simply put in parentheses, rural agricultural zoning, site plan review, and general provisions, if that's those amendments would be acceptable to the board.
So with such amendment, is the board comfortable moving forward? I'll wait for Mrs.
Well, could
Munson.
CJ tell me again what you're on your third whereas, and then are you just going to send that to me tomorrow? Exactly how that should be read?
Yes, I'm happy to get that language over to you, literally, as I just said, verbatim, in the third whereas where it says Town of Lansing, Chapter 270 zoning. We'll just put in parentheses, rural agricultural, site plan, and general provisions, just to clearly delineate, because Chapter 70 is, there's a lot that could go in it. So we just want to tie all of that together a bit more cleanly, please.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready. Mrs. Munson.
I don't have the names on this here. Let's see. Okay. Andrew Benson,
Yes.
Ruth Groff,
Yes.
Bronwyn Losi,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes.
Edward Levine.
Yes. Now we go to board member reports. And if I would ask if you've already given the report to be published either now or at a later date, that if you could not repeat that if possible for sake of time, it'll still be part of the record. So should we go with Andrea?
Words are already in our packet, and unfortunately, I had to miss the last CAC meeting, but I'm glad we passed the resolution to send a thank you note, which of course is the proper thing to do.
Absolutely. Okay, Ruth?
Okay, well, there was not a ITCTC planning, say this initial way, planning meeting this month, but I did get an email indicating that there was information from Congressman Reed's office listing the upcoming infrastructure grant opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And Fernando has itemized the items that he feels would specifically relate to Tompkins County. Related to climate change, energy, environment, broadband, cyber, and other things. And if anybody wants a list of those, I'll be happy to send them to you. There's quite a few of them, so I'm not worried with that right now. That's it.
Brown?
I had no committee meetings that aren't covered by somebody else's report this month, but I want to be sure that we carve some time out of the work session probably to talk about the proof of work discussion and make some decisions there about our next steps.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, I would like to, my report's in the packet already, but I would like to discuss the possibility of requiring masks for people coming to town board meetings. I think there's some real important issues there. I think Ruth Groff brought up some really significant issues in her household. And, you know, I like to bring that up again, especially since, you know, we aren't sure how much longer we're going to be able to do this from home. We're not sure how much the pandemic is going to play out. So I would like to hear other people's thoughts on that, please.
Okay, that'll be in the work session. Okay, we're still waiting for the official sales tax to come in, as we're trying to do the end of the year reports. It's always usually 2 months behind as far as this goes. And usually what happens is if I say, where's the sales tax, it usually shows up that afternoon, but this time it didn't work. So anyways, it looks like it's going to be healthy, but that doesn't mean that there isn't already an earmark for some of that. Let's just keep all that in mind. Keep also in mind, and CJ, this is not a criticism, but we have more financial responsibilities coming from the planning department, but also as in the past, CJ has worked very hard with her staff to make this as cost effective as possible. And I applaud you for that. We have also here in this discussion later on about a part-time safety inspector, which, as we know, the load of the work becomes bigger, just like in the past. When Patrick was 2 years ago, we had 2.5 people in that office, and now we have 5 full-time people. But it is about value. Same thing with Mikey. We had 1 mechanic, now we got 1.5 mechanics. Same type of thing with the planning department. All these different departments are growing as the need grows. And CJ alluded to it quite distinctly, actually, about here comes the stormwater, here comes all the check boxes, all the rules and regs. Somebody's got to do that. And you can't have, plus the fact is that we still are very popular with people building here. And so these are good problems to have. It's just a matter of how we manage our money and how we become creative to do that, to give the best value. So having said that, I won't go into the specifics, but it seems as like the meetings seem to be growing as far as this goes. We have more committees, which is fine, but now you have more commitment. I simply hope that they stay with what they're charged with and don't deviate into something else that they're not charged with. Because then that is problematic, in my opinion. So having said that, let's move on. So let's go into the work session unless you want to take a 5-minute break. You okay? Becky, that's okay? You need to go to the bathroom or anything?
Thank you for the answer.
The reason I say that is because usually I'm usually the one that has to.
Yeah, well, but,
No, I'm fine. Everybody else fine here? We don't have the luxury of just turning off the video like some people.
Well, we could have.
Anyway,
You didn't give us that option.
on that note, a little levity here. On that note, let's go to the engineer's report. Donnie, you're on, right? I apologize.
Sure thing. Yeah,
So is
Dave,
this? Go ahead, Donnie.
yeah, Dave might chime in a little bit later here, but I think Mike was asking on road report for Ludlowville Road. Is there also discussion for Ross Road tonight, or?
Don't know.
I would like to discuss both, please.
Okay. You know, we started Ludlowville Road. We've prepared a report here. I don't know if that's been distributed to everybody yet, but in short, you know, from 71, 93, and then recently in 21 last year, there's been quite a few road failures for that stretch north of the school. This last repair, or last washout has eroded quite a bit of the road. Some retaining walls, sheet piling up there has failed. A lot of surface and subsurface drainage issues down through there. We're dealing with really steep slopes, poor soil conditions. We've evaluated a few options to try to consider. One of the options is to fully reopen the road. There'll be significant drainage improvements, replacing some retaining walls, and also looking at possible some stormwater diversion to try to lessen the flow within that stretch of road to reduce erosion on the downhill side. Another option we evaluated was full closure. And that option would not just, close the road and walk away. It most likely entail some drainage work just to still stabilize the banks. The decision to, pull out the asphalt that's there, try to stabilize the surface for long term to keep, passerbys from using it altogether. So there is still a price tag with closing it. And the third evaluation we're looking at is converting it to a walking only path. Same thing based on the conditions out there. You're almost looking at a full road opening plan to get it back to a safe condition for a walking path. The price will most likely be reduced a little bit, but you're still taking a lot of the infrastructure improvements to maintain what you have. There's two pretty substantial concrete retaining walls out there, dating back to early 1900s, we're guessing, based on some historic documents we were able to see. Those seem to be in fair shape, but they need some attention in the short term. Rebars being exposed, concrete's falling. So there's quite a bit of effort there to get it reopened. If we go out to a public bid on the project, we're estimating roughly just under 2 million to reopen it. Let's see. We can get into other specifics if we want, but that's kind of a general overview of where we're at.
So I'll open the floor for comments about this. And, Donnie, thank you for making time for us tonight. Our intent is not to play gotcha or try to embarrass you. Our intent is to gather information. And sometimes if you have to get back to us, get back to us. Because not everybody has total recall. So if that's something you say, well, I don't have that exact figure, I'll get back to you, whatever, feel free, okay? Because this is the process. So I'll go first with Andra, or do you have any questions for Andy?
Are you saying that whether it's we fully reopen it as a usable road, or open it as a walking only path, the cost is about the same, 2 million?
We didn't run through a detailed cost for reopening as a walking path, but a lot of the larger ticket items in the estimate would still be relevant to have a safe passageway for pedestrians. When we look at a pedestrian path, we're thinking probably an 8-foot wide corridor that highway can probably plow and still be able to get basic equipment on there to maintain a surface if it's gravel or asphalt but other trail details can be considered and evaluated, but it's unstable grounds as is.
And it would be a path all year round, 12 months. As if it was closed some of the time, you wouldn't have to plow it. When you're thinking it would be a year, it would be open all 12 months of the year.
Yeah, no, there's multiple options to consider. if you reduce it to a single, cow path, single gravel path, that, it's still, it would take some infrastructure, but probably be a little bit more savings. And we can surely evaluate those options further, if that's a direction you'd like to see in the cost comparison.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ruth?
Well, Andrew asked the question I was gonna ask. But yeah, I would be curious to see what some of the other options are, even if it wasn't a paved path.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Rowan?
My understanding is that there was a pretty significant, what was it, in 93, the sort of significant failure that had to be repaired. Are we talking about, with this roughly $2 million repair, would it be similar to that repair where it'll kind of bring us up to where we are, but then 30 years down the road, we may be doing this again? Or is that the goal of improving storm water drainage and, making it a bit more robust and able to survive more of these high runoff events?
It's hard to put any kind of guarantee for a long time.
Right, of course.
I think the intent is to try to get a stabilized roadbed for long term.
Okay.
You're still dealing with repairing existing sheeting that's been in there 30 years. So the lifespan of that it's nearing its life, the next 20 years, give or take. The older retaining walls. So it's a fix for, maybe a 20-year, or longer, give or take.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions, Rowan? Okay, Joe?
My question's kind of two-part, but this is similar. Could we have been doing preventative maintenance on this over the last 20 years and not gotten to this? And is there a maintenance plan that would go with repair that would cause it not to have these catastrophic failures sometime 20, 30 years from now?
Yeah, I think a lot of infrastructure, there's proactive maintenance plans that can definitely lead to, preventing some of these mass failures. That takes time and money, and then identifying what that infrastructure is. Some of this, especially some of the larger retaining walls, should be monitored, time span, every few years to sooner, depending on conditions. That was, I think, your first part of your question, and your second part of your question. Could you repeat that, Joe?
The first part is, should we have been doing something for the last 20 years that we haven't been? Is there a maintenance plan that would go along with one of these repair options in which we try to reopen it as either a sidewalk or as a roadway? Is there a maintenance plan that we should be thinking about to make sure we don't hit a catastrophic event again? So it's kind of, did we screw up before? Not to point fingers, but just to understand, did we make a mistake? And, should we look around and see if there's other places that we need to be thinking about maintenance to make sure that we don't hit this? And is there something we would do with one of these plans that would be kind of a maintenance plan that every 5 years you do X, Y, Z to make sure that we don't hit this point?
Yeah, it's hard to tell from just walking in the site there, but it appears that some of this damage that has occurred has been over several years. Some of the road appears to settle, sheared off some of the storm drains, could be backloading some of the sheet piling, which could have been monitored. A lot of it is off the road, so it wouldn't necessarily be visible without a detailed inspection. So moving forward, I think we're definitely suggesting, monitoring this moving forward, especially with the patches and improvements to some of the existing infrastructure that's there, the walls, the drainage, just keep an eye on it. And, as
Sorry, Ed, you said something? I didn't hear it.
One last thing, just the nature out there, it's, steep eroded hillsides, not a lot of vegetation cover. So things change over time, and, from one year to the next, it's moving, it's silting in, it's changing. So, yep, definitely looking at a long-term maintenance plan, at least observation.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, do you have any comments or questions?
Well, I mean, Donnie and I have been out there multiple times, for a year now. I wouldn't disagree with Don that, general maintenance and keeping an eye on it would have been better. But then again, this happened 20-some years ago, right? Pete Larson came in with Orchard Earth and Pipe and worked on it, so. There's failure then was a lack of maintenance, lack of watching, and I don't know the answer to that, but this is the second time it happened, which is concerning to me. But it's a board decision. There's a lot of money at stake here, and to Donnie's point, there's no guarantee that this is going to last beyond 20 years. So. And I understand where people are coming from in Ludlowville, liking the access there, but I would hope that if we were able to fix it, that we'd be able to win against gravity, I suppose, the uphill slope coming down and the road sinking. I don't know, there's a lot of obstacles and moving parts to this, which concern me, for sure. Optimism. Positive attitude. Hopefully.
Well, like with any decision, you weigh the cost and the effect, right? If you had unlimited funds everywhere, what could you do? And I really don't like to go what should have been done. I like to move forward on what is realistic and what is feasible to go through, and what the cost of it will be. I understand people are upset about this road, especially now when you have the main bridge out. So it's like a raw nerve for a lot of people because they have a lot of traffic there, and I understand that. But on the other hand, and then 20 years, and I'm going to be looking at this again. I don't know. I mean, the last one was what, 90? Would you say, Mike? 90? 93. Okay, so it's almost 30 years, right? For this, and who knows what's going on underneath, right? Who knows what's shifting under there as far as this goes? I guess what I would like to know is, it sounds like, Donnie, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but this walking path, it sounds like there's still going to have to be a lot of work done for that to have it stabilized. And at what point is there a risk to make the road safe or the path safe? Don't know. Anyone else have more questions on this road?
I actually do. If we're thinking about the future, and talking about this may happen again because maybe the road's sinking or whatever. But if it were a walking path, wouldn't that in itself mitigate some of that, or you wouldn't have to wait to go in across the road? And I say this only because I don't really fully understand what happened here, but just from what I'm reading from this, would that possibly extend the life of the road or the path and any future expenses, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, would it be prudent for us to get an estimate of cost to do that?
Yeah, but I'm saying is if it were just a walkway with no vehicles going over, wouldn't that in itself mitigate some of the possibility of future damage?
And I think that that's a great idea. And so we're saying, how will we get a cost of that, right? Because if this were for free, we would probably be having this discussion. We would probably send an RFP, right? If this was done with a grant or something like that. In the future, and I don't want to fall on CJ again for grants, but on the other hand, maybe we look at this as a path, what the cost would be, and maybe Dondi, once again, we're spending money. So we have to have a consensus of the board, if the board feels comfortable moving forward with that estimate.
I didn't quite hear what Ruth said. Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it were a walkway rather than a road, with weight of vehicles going over, would that mitigate some of future problems of road sinking, that sort of thing? I'm not an engineer, I'm just asking because I really don't understand. In other words, you're not having all the traffic and weight of vehicles going over these people, and I wouldn't think the possibility of road sinking under weight of vehicles would be possible walkway.
Are you asking Don?
No, I'm just making a comment.
So Donnie, what do you think of that? Would it be less of a risk if it was a walking path, I guess?
Right.
Without putting words in your mouth, which I
Yes,
guess.
for future
Right.
problems, right.
If this were a walking path, let's say if it was constructed to be a walking path in the future, would there be as much risk for erosion and having this happen again over the next 20 or 30 years? I'm not asking you to look in your crystal ball, but from an engineering standpoint, would that be a better way to stabilize that area while you still have access?
Right,
Am I close?
right, exactly.
Based on your existing infrastructure that's out there, that liability still exists. And if you make repairs to it, if it's for a walking path or for a roadway, those still are infrastructure that you're going to have to maintain. You know, your 30, 40-foot concrete wall, the two of the walls there, and all the sheet piling. You might be able to lessen a little bit of the back slope, help stabilize it, but your drainage is still going to be a concern that has to be maintained and monitored in order to maintain a safe walking path. So if it's a road or if it's a walkway, it seems, you know, from taking what you have and converting it, you're starting with those similar liabilities. You know, if you didn't have anything in there and you're putting a new trail in from day one, it might be done a little differently, and you can maneuver that, but you've got to kind of work with what you have to keep costs in line. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but you're kind of stuck with some of the existing infrastructure already.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, I don't know if you saw earlier, Guy was wanting to say something. And I just have a quick follow-up on that, Don D. If I think, I don't know if this is a follow-up or articulating what Ruth was saying more clearly, but if we did do the walking path, would it likely have a longer life, or would it be similarly the same as the road, do you think?
My first estimate would be a similar lifespan. You're still dealing with that existing sheeting that's been in there for 30 plus years.
Got it.
And the retaining walls.
Okay, thanks.
So Guy, you want to make some comments?
Well, I just typed it because I wasn't having luck getting anyone's attention, except perhaps for Brian. That's okay. Here's my question, and I'll just read it verbatim because I think I wrote it reasonably well. And it's for Mike and Dondi, and that is, are there AASHTO standards that guide the underlying issues of where it is best or safe to build roads versus where roads are counterindicated? Maybe Cornell Local Roads also has stuff on this. And I ask because I've dealt with a lot of municipalities in a lot of places where roads were once built back in the day that have been proven to be bad choices or whatever, or they're unsafe. And what happens is they're usually closed or replaced, i.e. a different way of getting from point A to point B is selected. And there's several roads in Lansing and in this region generally where that has happened. For example, Town Line Road was shut down and replaced by Breed Road. It was so damaged because it was going down a steep gorge with unstable soils, and a hurricane came through. They just put Breed Road in. Whole separate problem going over a swamp, but going through the middle of a swamp is also why the town decided to close a segment of Schofield Road, because you just couldn't keep the road in good enough condition, and it wasn't safe enough. So I would think at some point when you start talking about things like steep slopes and unstable soils, that there's got to be some guidance out there as to what our best practices and, you know, what other options may exist. So I'm just asking generally if this is a place where a road should have or now should be built or replaced, or whether it's just a matter of expense and you can tackle the safety and lack of soil stability issues, you know, with some engineering and drainage.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with specific, you know, standards, but, you know, as you look at it, you know, there's, you know, you can put a lot of money to it. You can do a lot of engineering to work around what we have. You know, there's property acquisition, you know, lay the slopes back. You know, there's an engineering way to keep the road open, but at what expense? And then what's the maintenance over the life, the future lifespan of the road. But, you know, comparing it to a lane mile of a typical stabilized road, you know, you're going to be seeing repairs over time that aren't standard for a stabilized section of road.
Okay.
We can surely look into some other standards in similar cases.
Got a couple of questions. Who actually owns the land under the road? Is this one of those places where the town owns the land, or is this one of those where the property owners own to the center? And if we take the road out, it reverts back to them?
Yeah, on my understanding, I believe it's a road by use.
Road by use. So if we remove the road, could you walk me through a little bit what would happen if we took the road out? Because I pretty much assume that unless you built a huge fence from, you know, canyon to canyon, people are going to be walking back and forth there. What are you talking about doing? And what's the future liability of the path that is going to be there, whether we build it or not?
Yeah, so for a complete stabilization, I would probably recommend pulling the entire sheeting out, pulling the road surface and grading it back to, you know, pre-developed conditions there. You know, pretty significant undertaking still, but you know, for the long term, you've got at least a stabilized section of road that you won't have, you know, that safety issue of people still trying to traverse it. And then as it reverts back to the individual owners, they have, you know, somewhat stabilized section for what you can get out of it. Yeah, there's the two concrete walls that's a little bit harder to, you know, remove. You know, if that's backfilled or maintained, you know, that's a liability that either maintains as a town expense, or you look at other ways of removing those structures, which, you know, entail quite a bit of fill and tree removal to pull that infrastructure out.
So are you talking about turning it back to a steep incline all the way across that curve? Is that what you're describing?
Correct, or it could be stepped. You know, you still might have a step halfway through where you could maintain some drainage to help future erosion, but pull as much infrastructure out as you can to keep to lessen the future liabilities.
Mm-hmm. What kind of expense are we talking? Do we have a rough estimate of what that's going to cost us? I don't remember if it was in the report or not. I'm sorry.
No, we didn't go through estimating that at this point.
I would like to see an estimate of that, because, you know, then we can compare what it costs to take the road out versus what it costs to turn it into a walkway versus what it costs to turn it into a road. And I think we really need to see all three numbers, given that we have to take one of those three paths.
Well, how's the rest of the board feel about that? Because we're allocating taxpayers' money. You want to have that study done? And what kind of expense are we talking here just for transparency? Yeah, how much is it going to cost for these studies, do you think, Dondi?
Oh, I'd say another 3,000 to 5,000 to start to evaluate options. There's some existing infrastructure that southern wall. There's the landowner to the east. Starting evaluating how do you maintain safe access to existing residences, and then just starting to develop some typical cross sections, how you would bring this back to a natural state again. So a little bit of a evaluation to come up with a reasonable cost estimate.
Okay. How does everyone feel about that?
It's not an outrageous,
Was that a yes?
that's a yes.
Ruth?
I think we should.
Brown one?
Yeah, I just don't think we can make an informed, and we can't make an informed decision without the information. And since not doing anything isn't a choice, then I think we need to be able to compare the options.
Okay, Joe?
I obviously would like to see, a cost comparison, so I know what I'm choosing.
So let's say up to $6,000, Dondi. If it's more than that, get back to the board, would you please?
Sure,
That's
thank
not
you.
reasonable, everybody? If that's okay, or if you find out that it's going to be 10,000, please get back to the board right away on this, okay? I mean, these estimates, once again, we're putting you on the spot here, and some of the stuff, and I don't think that's fair, but on the other hand, we also want to work with you on this, but it seems like we need a little more information on it.
So we're looking at for a full road closure. Are you looking at a trail estimate as well to make some of the repairs, but maintain it as a pedestrian trail?
Yeah, I'd like to see pedestrian trail, road closure, and I think we have an estimate for returning it to a road. So that would give us the three options to decide which one would be the best route to go.
Mike, you want to have an input on this also? Work with Donnie on this to see.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy that we've been working out, just looking over that, we do have a cost already for the opening of the road, which I think was the initial question of the board originally.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea to figure out some other costs. Donnie and I, we were out there, figured that anyway, it's gonna cost the taxpayers something. We can't just walk away, we can't do that to the couple of residents, towards the school back to the south on the east side. I think Mr. Lippert and Tom Ellis are there, that we need to protect that section of road. And, the people down below where 5,000 to 6,000 cubic yards of earth are down, even can't have the rest of the hills sliding down to their property. So it's going to cost the taxpayers some way, shape, or form.
So having said that, it'd be good to find out how dangerous this road is. And if you're looking at it as far as structurally, what was built 30 years, 40 years, 80 years, 100 years ago may not be the wisest choice now if you had to do it over again. I'm not a no, I'm not a yes, I agree. We need more information on that. Okay, Joe.
I have another quick question. Since we have a couple residents on the school side of that road, is there going to be required to be some kind of fire turnaround there that allows a fire truck to turn around or the plows to turn around? Is that required, or how would that work?
You mean if you're saying for instance, if the road's not accessible all the way down to Ludlowville, what you're saying?
Right. If you close the road, do we have to create a fire truck turnaround on that end of some sort?
Yeah.
No, I don't necessarily have that at every.
I can't understand you, sorry.
Guy can probably answer this better than I can, but I can think of such as Beach Road where there's no turnaround for our plow truck or fire trucks or anything of that matter. But maybe Guy could lend some thought on this.
Yeah, I believe 750 feet or so is your limit with turnarounds. But I would recommend, if it's widening a private drive, getting an easement, or somehow having a safe turnaround at that area. That wall's right there, so you might not do a turnaround right at the last house, but maybe it's stepped back a little bit to the south.
And wouldn't the fire chief also have some input on this, Dondi?
For sure, yeah. If that's a route that's being taken, then yeah, during the design process, we have to count all that.
Especially if you have to put a hammerhead in or something along those lines. Okay. Have we explored as far as we can with this tonight for Ludlowville Road?
I guess my last question is, Dondi, is there any reason why we can't let your engineering report be released to the public so that the residents can see the information that we've been looking at?
No, from my perspective, yeah, no.
Can we get our town's attorney's opinion on this? Guy, do you see any concerns by releasing this information now?
No, I mean, you've made it part of the public meeting at this point. Probably should put it up as soon as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
While we're here, if we've discussed this as far as we can tonight, we should probably talk about Ludlowville Road, or I'm sorry, about Ross Road. Is that also part of this discussion or not?
Yeah, we could.
Or is it just Ludlowville Road? I thought we were going to discuss both of these tonight. Or maybe I misread that.
I thought we were going to do one at a time, so yes.
That's fine. We can do it later if you want.
No, let's go on to Ross Road. Let's.
I guess just one more comment on the Ludlowville Road. Kind of an interim phase here. The conditions might want to be monitored, as bigger rainfall events come through, and talking with Mike, there might be some options to temporarily stabilize the infrastructure that you have already to prevent further loss of infrastructure there. So that's something, kind of back burner, let's not just walk away from it if there's still an option to try to maintain it. So there might be some interim repairs that Mike in town want to consider.
Okay.
Ross.
Okay. Moving on, Ross Road.
So yeah, Ross Road, we've evaluated, looking at turning it into a full town road all the way down to the lake. What they would take to widen it into a yearly, not a seasonal road. So this was evaluating widening it to a two-lane, potentially realigning a few sections for safety from the steep slopes, trying to get a little bit of a cutback, improving drainage all the way down through to better maintain the existing road and future improvements. So, I guess for those that aren't familiar, it's the last leg of Ross Road, roughly, I think, a couple thousand feet or so, 2,300 feet of road that's seasonal now, that's serving one residence down at the lake and a few other parcels along the way. A rough estimate to open it up to a all year, all-around use, approximately $1 million. And then there's some other right-of-way acquisitions that I don't believe were counted in that estimate. Some railroad right-of-way infringements that might have to be worked out, or for the turnaround down at the end. There was a basic report to put together, and Dave Herrick in the office a little bit more familiar with this project, but And I can, Guy's probably got a little bit more on the legal piece of, are we looking at abandoning the road, or turning it into a all year full seasonal road?
Okay, any questions for Dondi on this road?
I would just like to ask, is there any reason why we couldn't release this report to the public as well?
No, not from my perspective.
And I suspect Guy will have the same answer, right? Since we've already discussed it. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for Dondi? Mike, any comments or questions?
No, I think it's all in the report. And again, it's a lot of money for a seasonal section of road, so board report on this and decision is very important to me.
Okay.
Sure. My highway budget for improvements $400,000, so.
It would appear as though we'd have to find other sources of money.
Yeah.
For these projects to move forward. And we have a $2 to $4 million possible bond for Myers Park. We have a discussion coming up about the highway building also. And we'll see what the taxpayers feel about this. As far as this goes, because if these projects were to be done, I guess they'd have to be bonded. In all fairness. And see if it goes to referendum or not. And they can decide on what they want. Their money. But I think for right now, we've had a good discussion, and we look forward to more information, Dondi, as you do your usual excellent, thorough job. And Joe has another comment.
I have a quick question for Guy. I heard something about getting a right of way from the railroad to cross to, I guess, do a turnaround down at the bottom. Can you give me an idea of how difficult that might be?
Well, I was going to raise a couple of issues just to make sure that people understand the terminology that Dondi was using. One is describing the road as a seasonal road is a good descriptive characterization, but not accurate or necessarily a legal description, because that a seasonal highway has a very specific meaning. Secondly, he mentioned something about an abandonment, and it's the town can do a qualified abandonment, but it's not the town that abandons a road. It's the public. When a highway ceases to be used for any 6 years as a public highway along its normal existing course, it ceases to be a public highway, regardless of whether the town acknowledges the abandonment or not. So let's not get our terminology mixed up right at the outgo, because I think it's pretty important not to create misinformation on some of these issues. With that said, it's really going to depend on what the roadway geometry is and how much room there is down there and how many switchbacks are going to have to be purchased or built to reduce the steepness of the slope to create a safe road for purposes of plowing and other things. But I think it will be very difficult to negotiate that with the railroad. I think it might be reasonably expensive. But for railroad crossings, towns do have rights of eminent domain for placing highways across railroads. The problem, of course, here is this really a highway? Because there is an argument based upon the actual history of the road that what this is a really, really expensive personal driveway. And this comes up in a lot of places and in a lot of ways. There may or may not be a reason to put a road there, but in order for it to be a public highway, there probably should be some underlying public purpose, i.e. a need for a highway at that location. So to me, that's really the threshold question. And that is, do you need a highway there? And if so, where? And then building it and acquiring the rights to do the switchbacks and the drainage and all the improvements. That's probably going to be more expensive than dealing with the railroad. But you can deal with the railroad and you have eminent domain for crossing the railroad. So even if the railroad is very recalcitrant or difficult, you still can get your road in.
Thank you.
Anything else on this subject? Guy, do you want to make any other comments? I don't want to cut you off here.
No, I was basically just wanted to make two clarifications and then answer that question because highway abandonment is really, really well misunderstood. And it's not something you can just go to Wikipedia and read about. You can try, but you probably won't get it right in New York. You're dealing with rules and actual highway laws that go back to 1909 and earlier. Past 3 years, I've even been up to the Court of Appeals on the question of what is a highway. It's not that easy. So I would first try to determine, as I said on day one, borrowing someone else's phrase, ground truth to history and understand exactly what you have there. Then if you want to open a highway, why, where, and at what cost for what purpose? And go from there. Because there's a lot of alternatives short of a full-blown public highway that can serve the needs of that area and the one resident or residents that's down there. Though, to be honest, I'm not sure the town even knows how that building came into existence because the only history down there appears to be a building permit for a pole barn. So there's a lot of interesting twists and turns as to what this is. And I'm not picking on anyone on Ross Road. I'm not picking on anyone at the town that didn't keep records well enough for Ross Road. I'm not picking on anyone who did or did not report highway mileage for Ross Road. I'm saying that if you really understand what's going on all the Finger Lakes, this is just the edge of the iceberg. That as continued development pressure builds to get lake views and lake access, that this problem with all these more rural remnant Civil War era towpaths and roads is going to continue to happen as you move north along the lake. It's happening in Cayuga County. It's happening on both of their Finger Lakes. And I deal with this on the other side of the lake as well. So these are pretty important questions. So in terms of developing an important template as to how to tackle the public interest versus the public safety issues on roads like this, I think this is a case to build well and build right so that you have that template when you go up to whatever road is next, either to the north or south, that sees this kind of request or pressure or, potential development.
Okay. Anything else? CJ, you want to make any comments? I want to exclude you here.
No worries. So I did speak with, or corresponded, I should say, with Mikey and Ruth as ITC liaison about some of the funding that's coming up. They're anticipating a transportation alternative programs cycle of funding coming up. That's a competitive solicitation. And I would say that's likely the only funding available that I can think of for Ludlowville Road, because my understanding from talking to Fernando, the executive director of ITCTC, of course, is that the Safe Routes to Schools additional points is still baked into that TAP system, into that Transportation Alternatives Program layer. So, there's the possibility for some grant funding there. And of course, TG Miller, I'm sure, would be able to help us out with those applications, which I anticipate, if there is a call for projects, that would be sometime this summer.
Okay. Thank you. So we move on. Andy, thank you so much. Very well. Okay. Let's see, what else we have here? CJ, I guess we're up with the part-time building and safety inspector and code officer shared services with town of Ithaca. That's on the work session.
Yes, I think those are, okay, those are two different things. Okay, so I was just like, let's wait, one item. when I sat down originally with Code Enforcement Officer Linde some time ago, as we were beginning the hiring process, I essentially asked him to go through a job duties list to really get an understanding of how much time was being allocated to essentially what code enforcement tasks. And as you know, there's quite a few things that code enforcement officers do. Or maybe you don't. But in any event, there is a pretty long laundry list of items that they deal with. And I'm going to bring this up here so that I can speak coherently about this. But in any event, in essence, some of the major job duties, of course, are plan review. So examining plans as they come in, what is a building or structure going to be constructed like? Does it meet the code, right? And then when I say code, I mean both the zoning code, the fire code, the New York State Uniform Code, right? So plan review. From there, then we also have inspections. Inspections are obviously a huge part of the job, making sure buildings are being constructed in accordance with their plans and safely. Customer service. As you know, we certainly pride ourselves on customer service and prompt responses, making ourselves available to the public, other agencies, and of course, all staff. And that takes up a significant amount of time as well. The actual issuing of permits is another duty, actually writing up the permit, issuing it, make sure coordinating to collect the fees with our ever capable information aide, of course, Heather Dries. And thank you for that acknowledgement of her work tonight. Very much appreciated. And then, of course, violations, making sure that people are coming into compliance is our main goal. We don't necessarily, philosophically, the punitive route, of course, is not our first step. We always try to encourage people to just simply come into compliance. But that actually takes a little more time because we do like to extend additional effort. We do like to make sure people know that we're here for them. We want to see them put the money into their project, not into fees or penalties. We really want to see the enhancement of the built environment. Then, of course, code enforcement officers in New York State are expected and required to do a significant amount of annual training. And that's, of course, to keep them fresh on all the new code changes that come out. If you haven't seen the code books, we certainly invite you to come down to the office. They are, maybe some of you remember phone books from back in the day. They are, phone book size books. They have a ton of information. Of course, a lot of it's online now, of course, but, it's really an unbelievably complex skill set, a lot of cross-referencing to understand. And that's just an amazing thing that they keep up on that annual and do so much continuous education. From there, of course, complaints, and then a whole host of fire and safety inspections that happen annually for different types of structures. So when you sit down and add up all of these hours, you can imagine that it might run a bit over 100%, which one person, 100% the hours. Yeah, in any event, I'm very happy to provide very specific hourly breakdowns or percentages as the board may deem necessary to make a decision about allowing for this additional staff. But suffice to say that our code enforcement officer needs the opportunity to go on vacation, to have a sick day, to go to the doctor, to be a person. And we really would appreciate the town board considering adding at least a half-time person that we could bring on board as an additional code enforcement officer, if not even perhaps a full-time person. I believe that these positions can be covered by the fees that we will collect, and more than anything, we want to make sure that the built environment in Lansing continues to be high quality, safe environment for all our residents and businesses. So that is it about the code officer position.
Okay, any questions for CJ?
Go ahead.
That it's part-time for us and then part-time for the town. One person. CJ?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I might not be understanding you correctly. I do want to mention that the second part of the work session item is about the code officer shared services, and that actually is a separate topic. So again, apologies for confusion about that. This would be a dedicated person just for the town of Lansing. I think it could be beneficial to consider another full-time person. But I think, in being prudent about spending and also balancing that with the fees that would be coming in from this person, that we would be able to share this pretty, honestly, very significant workload for Scott. I would certainly welcome even just a part-time person, as I know he would as well. And we've been thinking about it for some time. So the code officer shared services agreement, just to kind of fast forward just a bit in relation to that. We're really fortunate to have a really excellent working relationship with the town of Ithaca, in particular, Marty Mosley, who's the director of codes there. And he's essentially graciously offered to have shared services with us here between the town of Lansing and town of Ithaca, which we really see as inspired. We're both all using the new OpenGov system and finding our feet with that. I can't say enough good things about that, and the good working relationship that Scott Russell has also with Marty and his group there. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, anyone else have questions for CJ?
How does that shared services work? Do they get to see on their payroll, we get a contracted amount for that, or how does that work?
With the shared services agreement, essentially, we essentially just plan ahead for the times that we may need coverage, or in the case of an emergency. For instance, recently we had some issues in the office where Scott was not able to attend an inspection, and Marty Mosley graciously offered to go out and actually inspect that property for us. So essentially it's on an as needed basis, but that would formalize the relationship essentially between the two towns and those two departments. And I think that would be just really advantageous for everyone. So.
Okay, Joe?
What kind of timeline were you looking at for putting together a shared services agreement and for hiring a part-time or a full-time code enforcement person?
Okay, yeah, so to answer the first question, we received a draft agreement that I have been corresponding with Marty about, essentially just providing some track changes. We've also sent this to town council for review. I believe their supervisor simply will execute the contract. I'm not sure exactly the steps of, I'm a little stuck on exactly what the steps are to how we execute the shared services agreement itself. I'm not sure if we go first or they go first, but in any event, I believe that could be imminent, pending, town council final review, or, at an upcoming meeting. And as for the part-time code enforcement officer, I mean, ideally it would be advantageous to have an actual code enforcement officer as opposed to just a building inspector. Code enforcement officers have additional training and certification from New York State beyond just basic building inspection kind of foundation or fundamentals, I should say. And Mary Ellen, who's here sort of on the line, I'm not sure, did recently reach out to me about coordinating with you on how we do that posting. As I'm understanding, she's taking over some personnel duties in the town. So I wasn't sure actually where to start with the hiring process, as I know Mary Ellen's trying to work to clarify some of the ways we go about hiring. So I don't know if those answers are very clear, but.
Any other questions? So the shared service sounds like it's going to be a wash between we share and take some of their duties and they take some of our duties when necessary. Am I understanding that correctly, CJ?
Yes, that's correct. And I'm happy also to make sure the board gets a copy of the draft shared services agreement, once town council has, and Marty, of course, have gotten it to where they want it, essentially.
Okay, let's talk about the other one, which is the part-time. And once again, is this is a conversation, not a criticism. But are you anticipating increasing the fees to help pay for this position?
That's a really good question. And my viewpoint on this is there's essentially two angles from which I'm coming at this from. One of them is, the work satisfaction and the ability for all of our employees to do a thorough and careful job without feeling rushed, without feeling pressured. So I see that as a real value add. Maybe that doesn't have a numerical value, but we're kind of starting at that basis of, making sure people have the additional support that they need to, again, carry out the mission of having a high quality and safe built environment in the town of Lansing. Always driving mission, no question. That's what we do. But I would say this, when we're not able to go and do additional inspections, those inspections go unfulfilled, or they get kicked to a week later or days later, or essentially we're not able to provide the high level of service that we want to, in which we would have otherwise been collecting fees if we actually had the staff to be able to go out and do inspections in a more timely manner. So I can't say enough about the efficiency that I believe it would bring to the department, especially as we continue to streamline our permitting services. With our new software, it will be much easier for Heather to be able to, and then the code enforcement officers themselves, to schedule inspections more efficiently. So
please keep in mind, and once again, it's not a criticism, this is reality.
no, sure. Yeah, of course.
That you're funded by sales tax, and so is the DV fund for Mikey, for the highway department. Okay, this last time it's 80-20 split. Okay, between 80% goes to the highway and 20% goes to you. 2022 it's going to be 72-28. Okay, at some point, if we keep maintaining sales tax revenue, we'll be in a good spot. But we just can't crank up more sales tax. I'm not saying no to this. Obviously, you know how I have supported you and everything in the past, because I think you do quality work. But how do we pay for this in the future? And maybe that the fees are going to have to go up for this type of situation. I don't know. That's going to have to be something. We review these things constantly, and we do them at the park. We do it elsewhere, right? Where are we going with this, and how can we do this for a part-time? I mean, obviously, a full-time person, it is a significant impact, especially when you're dealing with benefits and this type of thing. As I said, I gave Mary Ellen some job descriptions for part-time, full-time, and maybe we can go from there. And the other thing is that who's out there, who's available. So there's a lot of discussions and decisions that have to be made here as we move forward with the financial strain, but also the value that you give to the residents. And that's, like I said, those are just comments to think about. This is an interesting situation, but on the other hand, Patrick is 71%. His department is self-funded this year. You've done a remarkable job of yours bringing them up to reality. I think with the fees, I'm not saying that you go overboard here, but I think there's other ways we need to also pair that money. And I would love to continue this conversation to move forward to see if we can come to a solution, because there's a lot of factors involved that really haven't been introduced yet, like availability. You have somebody out there. I mean, right now, they're at a premium, and it's difficult, and I get that. I also understand the sense of urgency to get these inspections done. That's all I have to say right now. It's not a criticism, but these are concerns I have moving forward, okay? All right. Are we done with that for a while, or is there an action you wanted us to take, or do you want to continue this conversation?
No, and I'm sorry I wasn't as prepared to talk about that. I didn't actually realize it was on the work session for this evening, but I do want to say that that the county actually, county planning has been asked by the ledge to take up a countywide code enforcement study. And one of the reasons why they're undertaking this is because, this is a little bit of the glib perhaps, but, the joke is what's the average age of a code enforcement officer, and it's retired. There's not a huge amount of pipeline, for these folks. And Scott and I have actually talked quite a bit about this. And we've talked to some folks up in Cortland County because their BOCES program has a training program for folks getting into the construction industry. And it seemed like it could be a really good opportunity to say, hey, there's this career out there as well, and all these opportunities. And there's, the reality is we don't necessarily have the labor market to pull from. And so the county, as the way that assessment functions back in the day used to be with each municipality, that has moved to the county. I think there's some opportunities there to look and see, what kind of services county could provide that maybe the town, would like to, hand over that responsibility for. But in the interim, I think at least a part-time person that really enjoyed, a fast-paced environment, and that we could, essentially bring in to supplement Scott's really marvelous work. I would just leave it there. So thanks for the consideration.
Joe?
I guess my question is, would bringing on another code enforcement officer help free up more time in the office that I know you're getting bottled up trying to do all the other stuff in the office? Would that person be able to take some of that pressure off as well?
I
Doing all
don't know.
the zoning, all the code or the zoning reviews and all the stuff that you really want to be doing, could that person take some of that pressure off?
I would say that, yeah, when I look at that total list of duties between, all the plan review, we discussed the inspections, customer service, the actual permit issuing, violations, and follow up with that. And then fire and safety inspections. I mean, frankly, if we just had somebody to really help with fire and safety inspections and some of these smaller things, going to check out of footers or, the roof, ice and water, those types of smaller jobs, it would really allow us to leverage, Scott's really significant expertise and have, sort of the secondary person going and doing some of the more, shall we say, routine inspection work. So, yeah, and I'm happy to provide any additional analysis that the board would like to see.
Okay. Any other comments?
I guess I'm asking CJ, what would she like from the board tonight?
Oh, nothing from the board tonight. I think I neglected to see that this was part of the work session. I was very myopically focused on the zoning portion. So yes, well, no action at this time, as far as I understand it.
Okay, thank you. So, American Rescue Plan, I think we've talked about that already. We have two more things. I think we have the masks and we have proof of work. So which one do you want to go first?
Let's do the mask. Let's do the masks real quickly because I hope that won't be a lengthy discussion.
What do you think? I asked you first, Brown. Do you want to go with that or do you want to go with the proof of work?
I have no strong opinions, so sure. Hopefully we can just knock that one off and then dive into the more complicated one.
Okay. So, Joe, since you brought it up, go ahead.
I would like to require that people wear masks at town board meetings. I think that we can make accommodations for those who are unable to wear masks of giving them a video feed somewhere else. But I would feel more comfortable attending town board meetings in person if everyone in the room were wearing masks.
I would have to agree with that totally too.
I commented, so I agree.
Just for town board meetings?
Are you talking about committee meetings and stuff?
I'm just talking about in general. I mean, can we make a requirement just for town board meetings, not for general public when they walk in? I guess we can. If the guy is, I guess the town board can make whatever they want, really. Like some input from you. I mean, we're gonna follow the county's regulations, okay? And at some point, we'll have this discussion probably again. If this goes to an endemic, but Guy, is that something we can just designate town board meetings, that's it?
You can set your own policy, and if you want to let the other boards decide what they want to do, that's fine. If you want to have a rule pertaining to entry into town hall, town buildings, town property, that's fine. If you only want to have the rule apply to town hall, that's fine. Obviously, you do have some limitations because there is an appeal pending on whether or not the mandate is legal in the first instance. Then I would also suggest that you would need to amend your existing policy, because your existing policy says you follow the executive orders and the mandates from the Department of Health. The Department of Health withdrew the mandate. It's now merely a recommendation. So you're not following your existing policy. You're amending your existing policy because you're no longer in agreement with what the Department of Health and New York State have said. So I think you'd need to make that minor change, but that's pretty simple. That's a sentence, not a big deal. I believe there's a provision in the existing policy as just updated, I think for the fourth time, that says we will follow New York State mandates and Department of Health requirements or guidelines. Maybe it's broad enough that you don't have to change it. But back when the last couple times masks were discussed, the discussion was, well, if the Department of Health gets to the point where they lift the mandate, then we won't require it. And nobody knew when that was going to happen. I think the Department of Health lifted the mandate before the pandemic was declared over, which is not something I think people necessarily anticipated. So it creates a tension that wasn't there before. I would just say, look at the policy and see if that needs to be tweaked as well, but do what makes sense for the safety of the staff and the public.
If the planning board or the ZBA or any of the other boards who are going to have, pardon me, I have a cough drop, who are going to have to meet in person once the open meetings laws are, once this sort of delay is done, if they wanted to require masks, is that something we would have to do on their behalf, or could they do that internally for their own board?
Well, that's actually a far more complicated question than I think you probably should get into at this point. I would simply say that
okay,
if you intend to let them make their own rules, then just delegate them that authority.
Okay, about the mask in particular, just say then each committee.
Right, because technically, like for a planning board, for example, if they want to have their own operating procedures and guidelines and stuff like that, they can do it. But under state law, it is mandated that whatever those policies and procedures are approved by the town board, and that's never happened. So there's a gray area there, and I would just say be very clear and direct them to make what decision they think works best for their boards. The health and safety of the people that come before them, as well as the staff and public officers that attend their meetings. It's almost like the rule should be town-wide, but you certainly can make what policy as you wish, because, for example, a lot of the planning board stuff, there's not as much need for quote unquote in person, though certainly you will have a day when developers will want to be in person.
All right. So this is more of a courtesy policy, basically, because we're concerned about board members, basically. How about staff? Is the staff comfortable with following the recommendations of the Tompkins County Health Department, which we've agreed to in the past? I have no problem continuing to wear this thing. If it makes people around the company, I would do that as a courtesy. I do not want to put anybody in danger to try to force somebody to put a mask on. if they're coming here. But on the other hand, if this makes more people comfortable, than someone like myself who's dealt with bugs for over 40 years, so be it. I will respect those wishes. I just want to make sure that we're on solid ground and we can defend this. And if the ZBA or planning board or whoever is uncomfortable, that they would also have courtesy there to do that. Because we're the one that actually will approve this policy. Once again, I carry a variety of masks. I see it, Joe. I will carry a variety of masks, and I'm very courteous with people as far as this goes. And I respect their wishes here. I want them to feel comfortable. Plus, we don't know when this executive order will stop, when we no longer can do this virtual stuff. And I think that's the real concern here, is that when you actually have to come back. You actually have to physically be here. And I sense there's concern from at least 3 of the board members, probably 4 board members, to do this. Now, whether we do in the future, if for some reason these masks go away, if we have to put somebody in a separate room to be comfortable, I think Patrick, we can work this out, that we can do that. Because like I said, I want to make people feel comfortable here. I'm not going to debate policy. I'm not going to debate science. I'm not going to debate everything. This is simply courtesy to the people who are asked for it, and I respect that. I just want to make sure from Guy, are we okay with this? Going forward, this isn't a wide brush for the whole town hall. It is simply for this board. Is that what I'm hearing?
Okay, but yeah, that's fine, but your existing policy that you just approved tonight at paragraph B reads, and I quote, "All persons entering any town building for meetings are encouraged to be masked in a manner as meets the requirements of masking as promulgated by the Tompkins County Health Department, including their recommendations as adopted from guidance of New York State DOH and CDC." And then paragraph F says, I think that's supposed to be adapt to sometimes rapidly changing circumstances arising under this pandemic and to protect town employees of the general public. This policy is subject to change as TCDOH guidance changes for the county and the town supervisor, or upon advice from the deputy supervisor, if the town supervisor is not available, may, if circumstances or DOH guidance warrants, issue temporary amendments to this policy, which amendments and directives shall not last more than 60 days unless adopted by the town board. So first of all, paragraph B doesn't create a mask mandate, but you could, if you find that Tompkins County guidance has changed and a mask mandate is warranted, you could up to 60 days do an emergency, so to speak, temporary amendment of the policy. I don't think the guidance from the county becoming more liberal necessarily means that you are changing your policy to match the guidance of the county. I actually think you're changing the policy to remain stricter than the county. So I think you probably will need to change paragraph B. Because it only says, right, it only says encouraged to be masked. So now you're masked, and you're specifically talking about a mandate, and you're not specifically talking about entering any town buildings for meetings. You're talking about entering any town buildings for town board meetings. So the policy that just amended in your consent resolutions probably needs to be looked at again.
Robin, you have a comment? Then I'll jump in.
Well, I'm wondering, does that policy need to be amended, or is this more like a board policy that's like our privilege of the floor, where we say, as a board, this is one of our rules? Does that need to be part of the larger town policy because it's specific to our board, or could it just be part of our sort of operating procedures?
I'm not sure I follow that distinction, because what this is updated amendment of Towns of Lansing COVID-19 leave time and general policies. If the town board is going to have a general policy that all people attending town board meetings should be masked, I would think it would make sense to have it in your written policy. If you're going to have pop-up ad hoc policies that aren't in your written policy, I might therefore ask, what's the point of a written policy? I'm not trying to be facetious, but what
No,
I
no,
am
it's fine, it's
saying is if you're going to have a written policy, then change it to what your policy actually is. Because I think
Mhm.
eventually, if practice and policy start to become
Right.
too divergent, you create a problem
Get a
that
mess.
shouldn't need to exist. That's my advice. You can do as you wish, but
Mhm.
I just think we've had experience when policy and practice start to become divergent, and usually the result is not good.
Right. I was just thinking that since it's not a general policy, it's not for every board, it's not for everyone who enters the town hall ever, it's specific to our meetings. If it made sense to put in there, but I definitely see your point about having the policy match what we actually do.
So Guy, there is a policy for the court. I understand they go under separate.
Yeah, they're under a completely different authority. We can't make policy for them, but yeah,
No,
they have a,
no, I'm not applying that. All I'm saying is that there already is a precedent here that you have a different policy for a different group already. And that is the court. When they come in, different set of rules, not negotiable, here it is. That's something that you want to do for this town board, to put an addendum at the end on it. Because I suspect we'll have this conversation again and again and again as this thing evolves into something that, once again, it's the courtesy of the board, because I realize eventually they're either going to have to be here or they're not going to have to participate. They're going to have to do something. And having said that, we discussed this before, can we do an amendment to this? We have time for our next board meeting to do it. We have time, I think, unless you want to do it tonight, to do this amendment for this board. Go ahead, Joe.
Guy, could we say that department heads are allowed to determine the mask requirements within their spaces? So Debbie could determine, within the clerk's office, and CJ could determine in the codes office whether masks are required. So we could set up a policy of they're required in the town board. Other boards are able to set their own policy, and department heads are able to set policy. Are we able to delegate like that?
you could, I think it would be somewhat confusing. So if someone comes into the town hall, they have to figure out what the departmental policies are so they know how to enter what room. Uniform policies tend to work best. And, but you can do as you wish. In terms of amending the existing policy, I think at paragraph B, all you would have to do is a short motion to add the following sentences. Or sentence: for purposes of town board meetings, all persons entering any town building shall be required to be properly masked in accordance with TCDOH and CDC guidance. I think if you just added that sentence to the existing policy, you'd have a general policy encouraging masking whenever someone's in a building for a meeting, but for town boards, it would be mandated. I don't think you have to rewrite the whole policy. I just think adding that sentence might help.
Could we add a sentence allowing planning board and ZBA to make their own policy as well? So that, because I know planning board does have concerns about that when I've talked with them, but I don't want to mandate on them. I would rather give them the option to make their own rules if we could.
Yeah, I mean, I can pull the policy back up and see where I think something like that may best go. I think it's under general additional recommendations and policies in section 2. But yeah, I guess you could do that. Sure.
I would like to move those two items tonight if people feel comfortable.
Could I ask a question? How is this going to be enforced? Are you going to have a constable here at every meeting?
Mhm.
I'm just asking the question.
I would enforce it the same way I enforce it in the store. I ask people politely if they're not wearing a mask that they have to leave. I tell them what the policy is. I post it on the door so that it's clear when they come in, and I ask them to leave. And people are generally very polite and cooperative.
So you'll be the person to do that apparently,
Sure.
because I'm not going to, I'll tell you that.
You've got enough to do in the meeting. You've got enough to do in the meeting.
I don't
Yep.
have any trouble with people coming in our office. Some come in with a mask, some don't. I have no problem either way. So,
Mhm.
But
I do it in the
same-
store every day. I'm fine doing it in the town hall as well.
Same here, our office today, probably almost everyone that came to our office was not masked.
I don't think it would affect everyday business.
Just
This is
temporary.
only because of this unique situation we have here. And
Yeah, I have no problem wearing, I mean, if somebody comes to our office with a mask on, we immediately put ours on.
as do we.
Yeah,
this is, and I hope this isn't negative, this is very similar to the ADA rules. Where you try to acknowledge for other people who have difficulty with certain things. If you have difficulty with breathing, you have difficulty with something else, okay? You make certain adjustments to go forth so that they can still participate. We will do the same thing here if we have to. This is a mere extension of that out of concerns. This is why we have handicap accessible parking amongst other things, right? So everyone can participate. And we try to make accommodations because the act of participating and the availability to participate is far greater than wearing this on my face. And I want everybody to feel comfortable that they can participate.
So if someone comes and says they can't wear it because of health reasons,
I would respect
they
that.
won't be kicked out.
I would
I'm
respect
just,
that.
I'm just asking the question.
I mean, once again, if they have asthma, they have COPD, they have other reasons or whatever, I would respect that. I mean, you have to, if you're gonna go that route, you gotta go the whole route. But on the other hand, I don't want to put anybody in jeopardy, especially employees. This is not about that. If someone comes in this building and they don't have a mask on, because this is what the recommendations are from the Tompkins County Health Department, so be it. This is, I think, maybe unusual, I don't know, but my lens is getting wider here as these conversations continue. This is about people feeling comfortable coming into our building and participating. And I'm willing to make that accommodation to have everybody back here. Because we probably see it's gonna happen, right? These executive orders. And we can also accommodate people to be in a different room if they feel comfortable doing that also. If somebody comes in here without a mask on because they, for other reasons, they qualify not to have a mask. Okay, I think we can also work with people here that they can be in a separate room where they're comfortable and they're safe. Okay. We do it great. Except where you are now, you can be in the next room. That's how I feel. And it's regardless what the opinions are. I mean, we have some pretty nice spirited debates here, but at the end of the day, it wasn't because it wasn't discussed. Whatever that subject was, wasn't because it wasn't thoroughly digested. That's my 2 cents. How do we get there is the question. But I think if our policy is that if you come to a town board meeting, and hopefully you'll still be hybrid, we can still do these public hearings hybrid, but they're not voting members. We can still do that. In fact, probably should be one of our things in the future to have hybrid meetings, so people can stay home and feel comfortable and participate. And so maybe that's one of the few good things that'll happen from this, is that we may have other ways to reach out to people. You know, so how do we do this in our policy to do this? Perhaps with Guy's recommendations. And I understand that the public hasn't had a chance to see these changes. But on the other hand, do we want to go ahead and do it tonight? We don't need a public hearing. I don't believe we still need this to have a policy change. And move it forward and be done with this. Okay. So we can revisit this. We can have a motion. We can have a second as per these changes, and we can put this forth tonight so that if for some reason it gets rescinded and the open meeting law now is in effect again, and you have to be in person to vote. We have things in place to do that. Be proactive.
I'll move the motion that Guy put in the chat.
Yeah, while I was looking at the policy and obviously subject to whatever might be needed for a future amendment or Mary Ellen's review, because she's principally been drafting and amending this thing. I typed up some language that I think gets you from point A to point B based on the discussion you've had tonight. And it basically changes subparagraph B from a general statement about recommendations for masking to now 3 separate subparts, 1 continuing that general recommendation, 2 saying that at town board meeting masking are required, and 3 delegating to department heads, boards and committees the ability to make their own rules, subject to them being reviewed, approved, or rejected by the town board within 30 days, whenever they're so made. There may be a better way to do it, but without knowing that this was coming in advance, I think this is a reasonable stopgap measure if it is reflective of what you as a board are discussing and can come to consensus upon.
I'm a little confused about the wording in point 2, where it says, for purposes of town board meetings, all persons entering any town building shall be required to be properly masked in accordance with the Department of Health and CDC guidance. That sounds to me like it's just repeating that they'll follow the masking advice rather than a requirement. What are you meaning there?
So do you think it would be better if it just said properly masked, period?
I think so. I think it would actually clarify it more.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I think if you put a period after properly masked, right, I see your point. And my intent was make sure that people are wearing their masks in accordance with the guidance on how to wear a mask, and not like what you see on TV where people have them down on
a real mask on your face. Yeah.
Right. I mean, again, but I think if you say properly masked and leave it at that, I think that's pretty clear without that extra clause. So I don't have a problem with that change.
With that change, I'll move it or second it or wherever we are in things.
Somebody needs to send this to Deb Munson and
I
you
typed it
guys,
for you.
you guys got a lot of schmoozing to do.
Well, that's why I put it in Word. And when I do the end of meeting stuff for Deb, I'll copy this to her, or she may already have it by then.
I can't read it. So-
No, he's gonna send it to you.
Oh, okay. And I think before we actually make the motion in the second or vote on it, whatever, that needs to be read, because I can't see that. I'm pretty sure nobody else in this room can see that.
Okay, well, do you want me to read it, or someone else want to?
I mean,
No,
I'm just trying to be
took the
logical
words.
here. Like,
Took the words out, that we need to read it as opposed to this. So please, somebody read it. So we all
Okay,
can-
well, I have the edited version, so I'll just go ahead. The motion would be to replace existing subparagraph B in section 2 with the following. The following masking rules shall apply in all town buildings and at all town meetings, semicolon. 1, all persons entering any town building for meetings are encouraged to be masked in a manner as meets the requirements of masking as promulgated by the Tompkins County Health Department, including their recommendations as adopted from guidance from NYSDOH and CDC. 2, for purposes of town board meetings, all persons entering any town building should be required to be properly masked. 3, the town board hereby delegates to department heads and other town boards and committees the authority to promulgate rules for their offices and meetings relating to masks, and such rules shall be presumed valid until reviewed and accepted, amended, or rejected by the town board, which review shall incur within 30 days of any rule so made or adopted by such office, board, or committee.
Okay. We all okay with that? Okay, so we have a motion to, for this amended resolution. There you go. Okay, there's a second. I'm sorry.
I thought Bronwyn said something before. Did you?
Did you make the motion, Brown?
I did before we read it out loud, but I haven't said anything since.
Okay.
So I don't know if that counts or not.
No, I would just withdraw the prior motions and just move it and second.
Okay, then I'll
it
withdraw
now.
that. Sure,
Okay.
I'll withdraw the prior motion, and then if you need a second, I'll be a second.
All right, so Ruth
Okay.
made it. You want to, Brown?
She said.
She
She
seconded it?
seconded.
Sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
If no further discussion, Mrs. Munson?
Andrew Benson,
Yes.
Ruth Groff,
Yes.
Bronwyn Losey,
Yes,
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay. Now, proof of work. Here is the last thing, I hope. If not, we'll keep going. Okay, Brown, you brought it up. You want to start?
I did. Out of all, like, CJ's been at every meeting and wasn't able to make one of the ones where it would have been really good to have her there. I think everybody saw her email, but she brought up a really good point that if we make a law, a zoning law, then we come under seeker review. And that can be extensive. It could be. And we could be asked to arbitrate decisions and understandings that are going to be pretty complicated. And so I think we need to talk about it more, but what I see as our three options moving forward are to continue and decide that dealing with being lead agency for seeker for this law is worth it, and we want to do that, and continue with this path to not allowing proof of work in Lansing. Or we can do a moratorium while we figure out what those ramifications would be, whether we want to pursue that law or not, because it does look more complicated. I mean, it already looks really complicated, but it looks like the complication was in writing it more than afterwards. So do a moratorium as we look at what the ramifications of doing a full law would be. And then the third option, of course, is just not doing anything. And I think we need to provide clear guidance again with this new information. Did I summarize that so everybody kind of understood, and or did I misrepresent something horribly, CJ?
No, I'm not being rude. I'm trying to get CJ's email in here because she was very articulate what she said here, especially with the county. And so CJ, could you chime in, please, and just refresh our memories here as far as your concerns here, and then we can discuss it further as far as this goes, especially with lead agency amongst others. I also think you had the county involved, and anyways, I don't want to.
Yeah, thank you, board. Yeah, so in kind of stepping back and thinking about this a little bit, talking with town council, of course, was at the 2-2 special meeting and was able to provide some guidance there. And then, of course, follow up on that initial directive. Currently, there is the Climate Action Council's draft scoping plan. So step back a few years, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, we had CLCPA, right? The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I think I have that right. And one of the key framework that's supposed to come out of that is indeed this draft scoping plan. This scoping plan is available for comment until, I believe it is May 1st. There's a 120-day comment period that is literally open right now. As I serve as vice chair of the Tompkins County Planning Advisory Board. One of the notable items that came up on Tompkins County Planning and Sustainability's work plan or work program for this coming year is actually diving in to that scoping plan and providing comments. And it occurred to me, hey, we could get together with the county planning and sustainability and kind of step back and provide comments to the state on these types of technologies. So, just as basically a refresher, blockchain technology, this distributed ledger technology, there's reason to believe this could play a significant role in utility and demand management in the future. Maybe not right away, but maybe in the 5, 10, maybe longer year future. And so the 3 points that I've made in some of the reason why I think, zoning per se is not necessarily most advantageous to the town is that, the New York State really has an obligation to indicate for us, where, what are the good electrons, where should the electrons go for the good uses and where do electrons go? We don't want that, right? I really, barring of very few municipal electric utilities, which I think we've been hearing about places like Plattsburgh and Messina. They're really unique in that they do have their own municipal electric. They have, power purchase agreements with arrangements through public service, I think through NIPA. And so my belief is that I actually think that the state right now is really in this kind of incredible window of discourse where we actually could make a difference on a state level and not just kind of have this piled on the town of Lansing of like, well, let's just kind of put it in the zoning and we'll do the seeker and maybe figure it out. The other thing, of course, that Bronwyn touched on and that I spoke about with her earlier today was, if the town is going to make a zoning change, and I've spoken with council about this a little bit as well, we have to classify that action under state environmental quality review. And as you know, or maybe familiar, DEC is starting to evaluate its own department-wide policy relative to CLCPA. So that kind of brings us back into this, perfect loop of, I really think that we could, joining forces with the county, could make a significant contribution to how these technologies could play out at the state level. We'll be kind of being mindful of how far we can kind of stretch this authority. Now, that said, I, of course, serve at the pleasure of this board. And I've prepared a motion and some language if you do want to move forward with the draft zoning. I think that we should just make it very clear to the code revision committee that this work should be prioritized, that it should be zoning. And I'm happy to share that language with the town board. And as Bronwyn mentioned also, there is an option of different types of moratoria. I will leave that to town council to parse through with you the different types of moratoria that perhaps could be available to the town board to consider. But that, of course, is an emergency or exigent need position. And that would not go to the code revision committee for any work. That would go directly to town council, given that that would be really and truly emergency situation as far as I see it. So I hope that it was a helpful, simplified approach to this. And again, I serve at the pleasure of this board. So what you direct, we'll carry out.
Okay, does anyone have any questions over here with Andra?
No, but thank you for the explanation because I do understand it better now. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth?
No, not at this time.
Okay, Bronwyn?
I don't have any questions for CJ so much as just wondering what we want to do as a board.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that hanging up there for a while then. Okay, Joe?
I got a quick question for Guy. The Code Revision Committee asked you to work on a proposed draft of a local zoning revision. Where are you at in that draft? How far have you gotten? I know you've been trying to pull a lot of stuff together from a lot of places.
I have the definitions developed in a rough draft prepared.
And what's your thoughts in terms of seeker and how complicated would the seeker process be on what you've been putting together?
Well, that's one of the questions that currently is under review. I can see it as a separate unlisted action. I could see it as also falling, with CLCPA 7.2 and the section 7 subdivision 2 and DEC already in a review. I could see that you could at least end up having the potential of them being an involved agency and determining whether we have the authority to do an independent review on the environmental impacts of some of this stuff. I see a zoning determination relative to local land use as being distinct from state energy policy, but it's that exact same distinction that makes what you're doing sort of trying to regulate a business process as opposed to a land use. So the same thing that you can sort of make a distinction on seeker on is the same reason that it really doesn't fit well into a zoning paradigm. With that said, if you get a big enough sledge, you can get a square peg into just about any size round hole, and that's sort of what we're going to do. My question about revisiting the issue of a moratoria is a moratoria for what purpose and why? You would only adopt a moratorium, and you'd have to distinguish between the type of moratorium that was done in other places where they had an existing power supply and an existing high load or density of load problem and a public service commission tariff for their operations, versus here where they're not even going to be on a distribution line, or at least the one that might be planned. They're going to be on a transmission line, so it wouldn't even fall within the town jurisdiction or affect town energy anyway. It would be a separate line with its own tariff directly between the user and the supplier. So there's a lot of distinctions that come into play. But if you're going to adopt a land use moratorium, which might be the only tool you have available, and that would be adopted for purposes of implementing what written policy relating to land use? You're going to adopt a moratorium because you just want to stop it until what? So I'm not connecting the dots on going that direction unless you want to try to figure out some means by which to say it's a general police power moratorium, and then you're still left with the question of, and you're implementing it until you adopt what policy, law, or procedure.
So
this is not
would an
really much
answer-
different than the advice that's been given before. It's just,
Yeah.
it was very clear that there was a vote of 5-0, write a zoning law. Okay.
absolutely, would an answer to that question be that, like, why are we doing this moratorium, to what end? Would a legitimate answer, I mean, you can answer anything, but would a legitimate answer be to figure out the ramifications of writing a zoning law about it? Like, to give us time to decide the cost benefit of those ramifications?
I guess, I think it's thin. Because I think the public hearing and the weighing of public interest and benefit is already part of adopting any local law. I'm not sure a moratorium necessarily advances that cause. But yes, certainly moratoria can be utilized to study an issue. And if you ultimately decide you're not going to do any zoning, then you're not going to do any zoning. Of course, if you decide that you are going to enact some regulation, then you've gone deeper down the seeker path, and now you've gotten two local laws that are creating risk instead of one. But I guess that's within your purview.
Okay. What concerns me is that where is the concern here? If it wasn't the potential for high energy use, that is where the concern is. If this were a self-sufficient type of energy producer, probably wouldn't, as I said before, we wouldn't have this concern. Also, the fact is that I think they have been either, I don't want to say allocated, I forget what the proper phrase is here, from ISO for 50 megawatts of something. So they're already going to use up to 50 megawatts of something, maybe. So if our concern is we don't want to have massive use, my understanding also is with these cryptocurrencies, when there is a surge, when there's brownouts, they shut down. That is one of the agreements. And maybe I'm wrong here, but just let me finish, guy, you can chime in. The other thing which concerns me is that can anybody just plop in a Bitcoin mining or cryptocurrency, just tap in, or do they have to go through rules and regs? Is this regulated now? I have more comments, but go ahead, Guy. You had concerns.
Well, no, I was just going to say that one clear distinction is that in Missoula, Montana, Plattsburgh, Messina, and Niagara Falls, they put in a moratorium in order to determine where to allow it and what site plan or other regulations to put in place. They have, generally speaking, seen this as a very potentially good thing, that it's a boon, that they will get a lot of revenue and a lot of industry and a lot of business that will generate off of these type of activities. And that's being there, they're looking at it as what can our local hydroelectric and energy supplies support? What do we need to do to change our tariff to get a rate to deal with these high loads? And where in our town are we going to allow them, and how are we going to regulate them? That's very different from an outright ban. So again, we're not talking apples and oranges, for lack of a better analogy. You're talking apples and suspension bridges. We're not even in the same ballpark they are. They're doing a land use regulation, and we're trying to ban it because we don't like the effect on greenhouse gas emissions and the CLCPA. Very different wheelhouses to be in. The other thing to keep in mind is that cryptocurrency is a bit of a stalking horse. It is currently one of the problems with proof of work technologies and other types of blockchain and cell and verification and crypto mining technologies. But there are a great many businesses that utilize this methodology for verifying ledgers, whether public or private, and all sorts of data. Land titles are going in that direction. Insurance is going in that direction. Banking is going in that direction. The energy sector is going in that direction. So if you're going to have a general ban, are you really reaching so far as to talk about ISPs, data centers, computer and IT companies, banks, software companies, educational institutions, all of whom have data banks that either can be used for this purpose or can be leased or purchased space on to be used for this purpose. I think, as I said last time, and as in my discussions with Clem, he said, well, I think you probably could come up with some definition, but it's absolutely impossible to enforce. So where do you go next? And he spent a while looking around to see what he could find. I spoke to Irene, and her answer was, ooh, tying it to land use. Ooh, that's a problem. Let me think about that. Maybe you could try doing this or that. So I spoke with the attorney in one of the municipalities that did adopt this ban. And when he said, wait, you want to do it because of the CLCP, because of state and federal energy policy? Yeah, good luck. So again, you can get the square peg in the hole. And as one person said, well, I'm not sure it's ever going to work, but if it is actually a deterrent and causes these facilities to be sited elsewhere, then I guess it worked. Of course, if you understand the energy impacts that we're talking about, being sited 30 miles away does nothing. You still have the same group of problems. So I don't know what the answer is for you guys. I just know that there's no easy solution, because on a very germane level, this is really not at its core a land use issue, but we can try to make it one. That's how I see it. I said that before, and now that I've done the work and tried to get that square peg in that round hole, that's still how I see it. But if you want me to write something that's as strong as defensible as possible to tie state and federal energy policy to local land use policy, I will try to do so. I think it can be done. I don't know how effective it will be. I think it will eventually be preempted, but I can do so.
So is this about about using energy, and yet, for lack of a better, I guess, Baywolf, I guess we'll call it that. They've been allocated up at the old power plant site, 50 megawatts. That's not us. So what if they do something else with that 50 megawatts? They're still going to use up to 50 megawatts. Is it, we're concerned about other people popping up maybe in the ag zone, or is there other ways they can use these? I don't know. But once again, the main concern, it sounds like, is the potential to use large amounts of electricity. And that is a concern for some people. But I don't know how you regulate this with the electrons. I simply don't know. I mean, and to have the town be able to defend that position. I would rather us partner with the county or some other stronger institution, let them be lead agency on these things, or the state to do a moratorium. I think that was being considered, but that seemed to have stalled for some reason. So anyways, those are just my concerns. That's all. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, first off, I'd like to disagree with Guy that I think that Plattsburgh specifically was trying to make them go away, and they were doing it with the rules that they could. I think they chose a tactic to regulate it to the point that people wouldn't want to go there. But their goal definitely was to make them not be there, not to bring them in under a certain set of guidelines. I am worried about them locating elsewhere. I'm looking at what a company did in Owego, in which they threw a bunch of storage containers on a piece of property, declared them temporary structures, and avoided site plan altogether, and just hooked up and started running their computers. And I don't think that's the kind of land use we want in this town either. And that's available in the RA area. And I would certainly want to preclude that kind of operation from happening, because I just don't think we want to take one of our farm fields and have 40 containers sitting on it, chugging away with fans and computers. And right now, that's a possibility that I don't know we can say no to.
Well, as with solar, things are allowed right now, aren't they? So,
Yeah.
So perhaps we put this in the IR where you can zone it, right? If you're concerned about this turning into whack-a-mole, right? Where all of a sudden this one pops up, you whack it, now it's over here. Perhaps you do allow it someplace, but you allow it in an RR, in the industrial, in the IR zone. And then you can perhaps, maybe now it is a land use, I don't know. But to address your concern, if we say you can't have it here and they show up elsewhere, then that is a concern, right? So maybe we do, and I'll finish up. Maybe we do focus on one area where they are allowed. That way, they don't pop up elsewhere.
Well, right now our zoning allows you to put essentially infinite number of storage containers in the RA zone. You're not allowed to do that anywhere else in the town. The RA zone is the only zone that's allowed. And I would like to limit that. I know it was put in there because it was felt that farmers would need to be able to put multiple storage containers for their farm use. But I think we could limit it down to saying, in conjunction with farm activities, you're allowed to put multiple storage containers, but not anyone who wants to put as many of them down as they want to is allowed to. And right now, that's the way our zoning reads. And so I think there are things that we can do that are clearly within land use policy that would stop some of the more egregious types of these things from happening. And, I'm looking at what happened in Owego, so this is not just theoretical, it actually has happened within New York State and theoretically could happen here too. And I want to stop it before someone starts moving forward on it.
Well, we have a code committee tomorrow. And maybe
Indeed.
that is one of those things, if we get to it, I think it's number 7 on the list. CJ, did you have any comments about this? I mean, there's a way that I think you can put it in a certain area. And once again, allow it there. And I think that would take some of Joe's concerns off the table if they couldn't put them in all over the place. How do you feel about that, CJ?
Yeah, so storage containers are definitely on my hit list for sure. So we have very, shall we say, peculiar standards that tie storage units and storage containers to zoning permits, which is super odd because they're really not a use. They're a type of presumably temporary structure, which would assume that then they would need to be removed within a specific amount of time. But there's I think that we can certainly tackle storage units among the sundry list of things to do related to RA. So that's certainly an avenue that we could pursue as well. If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like there's still a motion or there could be a motion to direct the code revision committee to consider changes to the IR zoning districts, if I'm hearing you correctly.
I think everything's still on the table. I especially really want to hear what Ruth and Andrew are thinking. But also I want to bring up that when this was sort of brought forward by the LACPF, they weren't only concerned about energy use, but other issues, noise and such. And so I don't know that restricting this use to the IR zone is what we want to do, because that was kind of the initial concern that was brought forward, was that it is an allowed use in the IR zone, and we don't necessarily want it there.
Where do you want it? Or do you want it at all?
Well, I think we don't really want it at all, has been what we're saying. And that's what we said 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't think we want it at all, and nobody's talking about the lake and how the temperature of the lake would go if it ended up down. Or the old development. And that's very problematic because how much algae do we really want? So I don't want it at all. And I agree with Joe about the containers. I was shocked when he told me. I was so shocked.
Or I think containers are a little bit more easily to control.
Yeah.
Because that's a specific thing, right? And if you're talking about cryptocurrency, once again, I'm a little bit over my skis here. It is a business, but that doesn't mean that they can't come back with another data use doing something else if they're allowed that 50. To me, it's okay. The energy thing seems to be limited right now, if you can contain that. It's the other things you're concerned about with the cryptocurrency, right? I mean, is that a business like pig farms? Is that what this is? I mean, Guy, can we just say no to cryptocurrency and that's it? Is that allowed? I mean, just not to have it in our town. We just did it with cannabis. You can't sell cannabis here. You can't do cryptocurrency. I mean, am I missing something?
Well, you were legislatively authorized by state statute to make an election about 2 of about 10 different forms of cannabis and licensing. So the question comes down to what is cryptocurrency? It's not really a currency. it's not legal tender. What is it? And if you read enough on anything that's reasonably authoritative, what you will learn is that there's a lot of general definitions, but there's not a consensus yet as to what it is. It is an industry that has, for large part, largely coming out of blockchain technology has a pseudonym inventor, and it came from some nefarious regions of the dark web, according to many sources. That it doesn't, but its technology has some promising elements to it. The problem is not blockchain technology, cell technology, or shared ledgers or community ledgers. The problem is one particular business methodology called proof of work that uses often is tied to a cryptocurrency reward for solving ever expanding logarithmic mathematical calculations, that the taller the block gets or the longer the chain gets, the more energy must be consumed. And there's a fair amount of mythology about these things not being subject to hacking. They've been hacked. About these things being marketable. They really don't have a market. There's some ways of converting them into cash, but I think the market is like 450 billion worldwide, and there's, I don't know, a few million in cash actually backing it. And some of it's just mythological commercial paper from companies that probably don't exist. So there's all sorts of problems with trying to regulate cryptocurrency because it's not choke. It doesn't have a dual existence. It doesn't have a body. And as far as it operating in the United States, the SEC is so far about one of the lead regulatory agencies, and it's absolutely illegal to take a cryptocurrency or a ledger company public and trade legally over the exchange in this product. It is not an illegal product. So what aspects of this technology or this business do you want to tie to land use and prohibit? That's the question that I'm trying to tackle.
Okay. CJ, what are your thoughts on this? Okay, Joe, just a minute.
Yeah, totally.
So what are your thoughts on this, CJ?
Oh, what Guy said. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I provided a lot of links and a lot of background information, and I know it's a lot. I tried to kind of curate the resources to try to really explain the proof of work technology. But I, keep running into, when I keep trying to tie it to land use, I keep saying, well, if somebody wanted to come in and do this, like, would they be a bank? Like, could they say that they were some type of bank or financial institution, like national bank? And why or why not? And do we want to have our code enforcement officer make that determination and zoning that they wouldn't be a bank, and then send them to the zoning board of appeals if that interpretation, for instance, is challenged? That's kind of where my thinking at it is, like, with land use, right? You start with, what is it? And I want to answer that question, and I can't.
Okay, I'm still here. Okay, Joe.
My question's directed at CJ. How about if, instead of trying to go directly at cryptocurrency, we address two of the major things that I think we can do with land use, which is noise and containers. Would it be easy to draft up a couple of things on those issues to say we're putting noise limits on, basically everything to some degree, and bring our container law into a reasonable shape? Is that something that could be done relatively quickly and at least get rid of a couple of the large externalities that people are facing?
Yeah, Joe brings up a really good point, which is, like, I think if we're thinking, like he's saying, about these negative externalities that are reasonably within the town's purview, okay, right? Like the storage containers as uses, super weird, definitely on our list to be dealing with temporary structures and temporary uses. They're on our whiteboard list of things to tackle, actually as part of RA, which is already queued up, ready to go. We're ready to dive into that. As for noise ordinances and the like, I, of course, always defer to town council on this, as those are a really specific tailored set of regulations. Also, enforcement is one of those things with noise ordinances in rural communities. We certainly don't. I hope that my prior conversation with the town board did perhaps illustrate in a small way that we wouldn't necessarily have the capacity to be, going out to, folks' property lines at, 3 or 4 in the morning to try to make decibel readings to make sure that folks are in compliance with the noise ordinance across, 60 square miles. Yeah, so that I think would be something of a capacity issue. But yes, the storage containers are already on the list for sure.
That seemed to be specific.
So are you saying that you don't think we could put together a decent noise law? Because I think with, especially with these Bitcoin things, it's not just 3 in the morning. It's 24/7. These things are running with huge fans that are making a bunch of noise. So I think that's something that could be done, on a reasonable complaint-driven basis. And certainly if they came before the planning board, that would be one of the things the planning board would have to point out to them is you got a noise level that has to stay at blah, 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 whatever we said.
Yeah, okay. So we'd have to kind of unpack that a little bit. We would probably have to tailor it such that the local law related to noise, that we were able to tie that to those uses that were subject to site plan review so that we could then make a tie into seeker, a part of the seeker criteria for reviews, noise, odor, things of that nature. That would potentially be an impact of a given project. And I'm not just talking about this, like, whatever type of land use. It doesn't, it's not specific to, anything related to cryptocurrency or whatever. I mean, very broadly, actually. So again, yeah, I would defer to Guy about anything related to noise. That's a really tricky area of law.
Well, noise, although most people don't know this, noise is actually regulated by New York State as air pollution. It's considered a form of air pollution. So you can have a noise law, but to target one business with a noise law when you have other businesses that are also running fans and making noise 24/7, you start to run into some issues like that. But that's okay. I mean, if that's the direction you want to go, then that's the direction you want to go. Noise regulation hasn't proven to be particularly effective with windmills, which clearly generate a lot of noise, including some alleged subsonic noise. I think it's clear they create subsonic noise in what's called the thump or the pulse. The question is, what's unclear is what are the actual health impacts, if any, from that? And do setback distances make any difference whatsoever, since it's at certain amplitudes of the sound wave that damage can occur? So you could be 10 feet away and take no damage, and 18 feet away and take a full brunt of the noise of the amplitude of the wave. So acoustics technology is pretty difficult stuff to regulate because you have to understand ambient noise levels and a whole bunch of other stuff. I would think containers and trying to target the types of businesses that would, the zones where you don't want it and the type of businesses that you think would be most likely to build massive server farms would be a better tool. But, It's up to you.
What do you mean by that last statement? What would you be suggesting?
Well, a lot of the existing blockchains that are out there, it's not a question anymore of, a bunch of people sitting at MIT and linking 10 computers together and trying to solve one of these algorithms. It takes hundreds or perhaps thousands of servers interlinked and working on the problem to succeed in a proof of work environment. And those don't tend to be smaller facilities. I saw one municipality had 3 servers connected by any device. Is enough to be a server farm. Well, okay, but that would, depending upon how your home internet is set up, that might include a lot of houses that have routers. So I think you'd have to define it in terms of their function, i.e. what are they doing, or whether they're commercial versus residential. One of the tricky things about this stuff is that you can have 150 servers in an old barn and 50 servers in a shed and 50 servers in, Illinois and 50 servers in Texas. And then they can all share the data. It doesn't, it's not an industry. One, again, we're talking more about a business process and not a business. And 2, it's not an industry that tends to have a traditional site. It can be very loosey-goosey. And I think that those are problematic edges of a lot of zoning type issues that are coming. It's already affected many areas of zoning, like what is a home occupation? So many people can work remotely in their home. Are these home occupations? Are all these people out there that are working from home supposed to be getting, special use permits or site plan reviews? I think that's a tall ask and an unlikely interpretation, but it in fact might be accurate under most of the zoning laws that exist in this state. So I think we're just seeing the front edge of something, and we're dealing with it because it's very vexing. It doesn't seem to have an easy answer under a zoning paradigm, but it seems like it should, given the impacts. So, clearly, as you and I discussed earlier, Joe, the federal government has completely dropped the ball on this whole issue. I mean, in ways that are beyond fathoming. The state government is at least tuned in and paying attention, though it's unclear whether they're going to do anything. And the DEC at least seems to have their hand on something in relation to the CLCPA, given the at least 7-to-1 ratio it would have just on renewable energy. Like if this business landed in New York State, the CLCPA would need 7 times more solar than it currently plans, which of course is not feasible because there's probably not that much available land in the next 20 years. It would take far more planning. So the question is this a town issue? If so, how do you tackle it? And what amount of resources should you place where to achieve the desired end?
And that's where I'm looking at the externalities, and the 2 that I see that I think are the most reachable are dealing with storage containers, which I think we can do relatively quickly if we put our minds to it. And noise, which is not just on this industry. I think, you've sat in enough planning board meetings to hear people say the noise from that operation's objectionable. Can we have a noise ordinance? So I think we've got reason plenty to look at a noise ordinance for the town. I recognize that they're difficult to enforce. I also recognize the conversation we had earlier about certainly if we go down this road, we're going to need more people in the town who can do enforcement on that kind of thing. But I think this is something that's come up over and over again, and it's peculiar to this industry, but it's not just this industry that is driving it. I think the town has been told over and over again by its residents that they'd like to see some kind of noise ordinance so they can tell the neighbor who's being objectionably loud to stop.
Robin, do you have any comments before we wrap this up? Because you're going to have 3 board members going to adjourn here in a minute. If you're not careful. Do you have
Right. Well, I just don't want to leave CJ and Guy hanging. I think we need to, we're kind of going around the same stuff again. We need to decide if we want to pursue this law, because I think we all want this to not happen in Lansing, and do we want to continue to pursue the law? Do we want to look into a moratorium, even with the cautions? Do we want to do what Joe's saying? I think we just need to make a decision that's with this new information that we now have.
Well, and please keep in mind that as we keep burning up our resources here of time on the planner,
Right.
we have
Yeah, that's part of the decision. Yeah.
trying to be done, and all of a sudden this comes out of left field, and we're concerned about it. Once again, this power company has already had their allocation of 50 megawatts, so now we have a wider discussion of this may go into a different area. So how are you trying to contain the containers? And the noise ordinance is a toughie. How do you enforce it? When do you enforce it? I'm not throwing a wet blanket on it. I'm simply trying to be realistic about what we can and cannot achieve. And we already have our planning department stretched trying to get the RA done, amongst others. And where do you want to go with this as far as, do you want to do like a short-term thing? Do you want to do a long-term? I mean, I know the moratorium is always something that comes to mind, but then we have to do something about that. So go ahead, Guy. I'm going in circles.
I was just gonna say, if we have a code committee tomorrow, and I have at least some definitions and some skeleton to share that might be able to be built off of, can't the board just refer this discussion to the code committee, look at zoning changes, look at a noise law, and then make a recommendation back to the town board, and the town board can debate it further or consider it in the break? Because I don't know that you're in a position where you can definitively get to an answer tonight. Maybe you can. But the codes committee is gonna meet tomorrow. They've already received this charge from the town board. And if you want to look at accelerating a container rule or a noise rule as part of whatever pieces of the zoning that I've come up with might or might not work, that seems to me to at least be a way forward, so that it can be shared with the board before the next meeting, so you know whether or not you are or are not going to be scheduling a public hearing and getting something launched.
Okay, that sound reasonable? Okay,
Yes.
are you okay, Brown, with that?
Yeah, so we're going to go forward and ask the codes committee to continue work towards this local law, and look at the bigger picture related to it also.
A little over 10 hours from now, we'll be right back at it tomorrow.
And CJ, did you want anything more official to that end?
No, just the initial
Got it.
referral. You have a policy idea. Let's get it to, as Guy mentioned, the code revision committee. They'll then come back to you with the preliminary report recommendation, and then we can roll. This is great guidance. This kind of helps us, start to finesse this and scope it out, like I was saying. So this is super helpful.
Great.
Thank you.
Any need for executive session?
Yeah, a guy sent out an email about property acquisition that I didn't really understand, so I would like to go into executive session to get a quick from Guy about a potential property acquisition.
One moment, please. Do I touch any buttons?
Don't touch anything.
Okay.
CJ's in charge.
We'll be here waiting for you. Come in at 6:30 tomorrow.
Okay. I'll expect it.
Okay. So, Mrs. Munson, I guess you can go.
Well, we need to finish.
I think we need to take a break.
We
here.
need to do the executives, we need to do the vote on the executive session. We
Okay,
need to-
Joe made a motion to go into executive session. Anybody second it?
What, and so wait, what's it for?
I'm not-
Number 3, proposed acquisition, sale, lease, real property, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
That is what you want it for, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. And who's the second on it? Who else wants to go to executive session?
I suppose we should. I'll second it. I suppose we should. I really don't want to, but want to the heavy, loaded way to question it.
I can't wait for you guys to come here and maybe we'll, anyways, I'm not going down.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
This is painful. Okay. We need
Can I
to take
vote
a
both?
We need to take a 5-minute break, okay? For various
Clear.
reasons.